Thank you all for coming to this event tonight. We are honored that you guys decided to spend your evening with us here. My name is Austin Rose, and I'm the chapter president of Turning Point USA at Boise State. For those of you who don't know, Turning Point USA was the organization started by Charlie Kirk, which aims to promote America First, Christian, and conservative principles throughout college campuses. We've done a great job here at our chapter of creating a tight-knit group of conservative students who are able to learn professional skills which help them in the real world, and then also make these connections with people throughout college. I am going to welcome to the stage somebody, Charlie from the Rasho Christi Christian organization, to speak a little bit about his organization. So, thank you.
Ratio Christi means Reasons for Christ. We are a group that meets on Saturdays, equipping believers to defend their faith with confidence, gentleness, and respect. If you ever wished you felt more prepared to talk about Jesus, then this is the group for you. Before I joined Ratio Christi, I couldn't even answer the most basic questions about my faith. My friend Marcus, when we were walking on the Greenbelt together on a sunny day, asked me this very simple question one time. He said, "Charles, why do you believe in Jesus?" What's interesting is the stakes couldn't be lower because Marcus is a Christian, there's no one around to hear me, and I've also been a Christian my whole life, so this should be a walk in the park. But when he asked me that question, what happened is I froze, and I didn't know what to say. I felt convicted, because if I want to call myself a follower of Jesus, I can't even defend the most basic question that someone would ask about him. Here's the thing, people aren't asking questions as simple as that. People are asking much deeper and much more difficult questions about suffering, about identity, about meaning, and other heavy topics. Here's a question that I got one time. Someone asked me, they said, "Charles, where was God when I needed him the most? If he really loved me, he would have saved me from the darkness I was in, but he didn't." Do you feel prepared to talk to people when topics like that are brought up? Here's the good news. You can learn to have these conversations. Imagine being able to look at someone in the eye, someone who's hurting, someone who is searching, and actually feel ready to walk with them. Not scared, not confused, prepared. In the next 6 weeks, on Saturdays, we are taking on one big question: suffering, identity, meaning, truth, morality, and more. Each week we will be looking at what the Bible says, how to think clearly about it, and how to talk to people who are wrestling with these deep questions. By the end, you won't just know answers, you will be able to stay calm, confident, and clear when someone opens up about the deepest things in their life. This Saturday, we'll be talking about big questions around Jesus' resurrection, and we'll be taking the material straight out of I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, Dr. Frank Turek's own book. If this is something you want, scan the QR code. I will see you this Saturday at the Biblical Study Center. We'd love to walk with you as you grow, and I hope to see you there. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. We're now going to bring up Daniel from the Biblical Study Center to give a few words on what he's doing. So, thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. It's an honor to be here with people who share a love for truth. I want to begin by acknowledging two outstanding organizations here on the campus. First of all, Ratio Christi. Michael Oswald, thank you for starting this chapter here because you are training your students in apologetics and teaching them to engage tough questions so that they have confidence and clarity. And you're basically shaping the next generation of thinkers and leaders. Thank you for that. Also want to give a shout out to Austin Rose, for Turning Point USA. You guys here are creating space for students who can explore the intersection of faith, freedom, and civic responsibility, and that is much needed, and that's why most of us are here. So we're very grateful to stand alongside you for that. In case you don't know, the Biblical Study Center, what's that? Well, guess what? It's a place where we call the BSC, I'll refer to it that way. It's a place where students can learn about the Bible and their walk with Christ, and it's just one block south of the football stadium. And it's been there for 52 years, okay? Most folks never heard of it, but guess what? You're going to. We're going to make a big noise pretty soon. We've been teaching biblical subjects at the college level. Students can come over, take a Bible class, and get college credit for it from our professor-level instructors. Take that college credit, bring it back here to BSU, and exchange it for an elective credit. And we've been doing that for 52 years. Except that our board of directors said, hey, it's time to change focus. So we're going to do that. We're going to do that by changing the way we do classes down to 5-week classes instead of 15-week classes. And they're not necessarily going to be for college credit, but if you want to, we can work that out. But they're not just designed for students anymore. They're designed for students and the people here in this room. Everybody, you don't have to be a BSU student to take our classes anymore. So, what kind of classes? Great question, glad you asked. Oh, by the way, the classes are only $10. Did you know that? Now you have a piece of paper with you, with this thing that says classes. This is the list of classes that we have offered in the spring. There will be more coming, but you need to realize that you can take them. And all of our new policy is that all of our classes are attached to a certificate. If you want a certificate, this means growing up leadership in your church, as well as growing up student ministers here, student leaders on campus. 5 different certificates we're offering now. Certificate in apologetics, a certificate in biblical studies, a certificate in biblical counseling, also missions and intercultural studies, and Christian education. You're going to ask now, do I have to enroll in a certificate program? No. You don't. If you just want to take one class, skip that frou-frou latte that you buy at Starbucks and take the $10 and enroll in a class. That's all you got to do. And by the way, we got a table over there. Maddie, our programs coordinator, is here. Well, we can sign you up tonight. You don't even have to pay tonight. You can come say, I want to sign up for this class. We'll sign you up tonight. And we'll be there all night long. All right, a couple of other quick things is that in reaching out to the community now and to be a funnel to the different campus ministries and help us out, we're also going to be doing a worship night this next December 6th, and one night a month we'll be doing a worship night, no teaching, just worship. But also starting the 7th of December, we're going to be doing a Bible study on Sunday mornings for those who don't want to go to church or are intimidated by church or a new believer, curious. No singing, no passing the plate, just a very interactive Bible discussion. So with that, I'm going to encourage you to go to boisebsc.org. Boise BSC, that website's being redesigned, by the way. And one more thing, students. Any students here? A couple of students, good. We are starting a biblical studies club in the spring. And you'll want to be a part of that. We're going to be doing some cool things. My name is Daniel Bobinski. I'm the educational director at the BSC. If you've never been there, come on down. I'll be happy to show you around. We're doing a lot of things now to build up, more than I have time for tonight. But with our expanded vision and God's grace, we're going to reach the community and the students at a deeper level and get them to be doing what God called them to do. Thank you.
All right, we're now going to bring up Dr. Kevin McGarry, who's a ministry leader, entrepreneur, author, and public speaker. He's the co-founder of Every Black Lives Matter, an organization dedicated to civic engagement and biblical justice. Kevin is also an accomplished author with 10 published books. His latest releases are Free to Be Servant and Slave, the Archetypes of American Politics, and Manifesting God's Kingdom Now. These books offer insightful critiques of cultural schemes that he argues undermine American principles, traditions, and biblical truths. Dr. McGarry holds a doctoral degree in Christian ministry, leadership, and management, and maintains an active role in supporting pastors and ministry leaders worldwide. Please everyone welcome to the stage Dr. Kevin McGarry.
I can't say enough what an honor it is. You know, it's my first time I've been on a college campus in quite a while, and the complexion of the average student here has really changed. I was pulled one of the guys aside and say, look, there's some people here that don't quite look like students. What's going on up in here? They said, oh, no, it's the community and schools. And got it. I'm thankful that you guys came out tonight. I'm going to try to do my part. My good friend and brother that I'm sure we all loved, Charlie Kirk, is irreplaceable. So it's not like I could stand up here and do what Charlie used to do. He was just a brilliant intellectual. He was absolutely amazing as a young man. And we're not going to try to replace that. We're going to try to stand in as three brothers. I'm honored to be here with Neil Mammen and Frank Turek, both good friends, and these guys are savants, so they'll come up after me. You got to deal with me for a little bit. So I'm going to try to, soften up the crowd a little bit. You know how they bring out the early act? Okay, man, soften them up a little bit. I'll soften you guys up a little bit, and then we get the real, intellectuals here. And we'll get a chance to go through it, and then we'll get your questions at the end. But, again, I just want to thank you guys for coming out tonight. I know you probably had a lot of other things you could have been doing, and I'm thankful that you're here. I wanted to begin by just talking about a subject that's near and dear to all of our hearts. If you're like me, you're called the white supremacist. Yeah, believe it or not, I am called the white supremacist. My brother-in-law says, hey, Kev, you're a white supremacist, man. I'm like, are you kidding me now? What in the world is going on up in here? And so if you're like me, you probably have been called that before, and you're wondering, like, what in the heck? What is a white supremacist for real? What is a racist? Some of these terms that they're throwing out and just, as pejoratives for a lot of us, if not all of us, we're probably trying to wrap our mind around what in the world are they talking about. I have no idea what their criteria is or what it is. And so I wanted to start with that because Neil and I, as Every Black Life Matters, have gone around the country and we've had these engagements with culture and with people in the communities. And the thing that always comes up is a hypersensitive lens on race. And so that's an issue that I think we need to kind of figure out. It was such a major subject for us that I had to write a book called Woked Up, and it's going after the wokeism movement. But basically, at the end of the day, it confirms. Everything's footnote. It confirms that anybody that would say, "Yeah, I'm woke," you're actually a racist and white supremacist if you say that. So this book actually takes you through it and really quantifies what a racist and white supremacist is. It's everybody that would self-identify as being woke. So imagine that, everybody identifies as being woke, actually being the... And this book walks you through all of it. Available on Amazon and other. So, but I want to give you the cliff notes of what my studies have had, really the research on that, where it ended up. So let's talk about that just a little bit. We're going to talk about racism and white supremacy and what in the heck it is. It's being used as a pejorative, but we have to understand what it is. A lot of us are probably guilted, shamed. We feel some kind of way when our kids, grandkids, little nieces and nephews come up and say, you're a white, whatever. So we need to be able to parse through, how do we deal with that? So here's the deal. Let's start from the beginning. So the beginning of the beginning for us, we're all people of faith pretty much in here. The beginning of the beginning in the fall of the Garden of Eden, we had a fall of humankind to a large degree. And from that point, we had people that were, in our ancient times, that were tribal. Starting from the beginning, because it builds up to where we are today. We had some people that were tribal. And so if you accidentally stepped over somebody else's sovereign, whatever they thought was their sovereign territory, you were captured and you were part, because you were not in the tribe tribalism, you were, enslaved and other stuff. That was pretty much the way that worked in ancient times, biblical times. Then as we began to evolve as societies, we began to look more at, it's not so much that you're not a part of my tribe, but you're not a part of my ethnicity. We don't share any sort of common background, so I have suspicions. I have reasons and rationales for not necessarily inviting you into my house because you're not from my people group. Ethnicity, right? So we had tribalism, we had ethnic strife that pretty much, early civilizations, that's what they dealt with. There was never a thought of, well, I don't even know if you're even human, man. They accepted people as human, and everybody it's just you're from a different tribe, you're from a different ethnicity. I don't know if we have anything in common, so I'm going to be cautious, and I'm not going to engage with you much. This is basic human nature stuff, right? So here's what happens. We arrived then in the early to mid to late 1700s, and we have anthropologists who are beginning to really recognize that the world is evolving with mass populations on different continents, and they're trying to wrap their minds around how to classify humankind. So if you've heard Charlie talk about, racism is a social construct. Race is a social construct. I'm giving you the genesis of that because it is. It's completely made up. So in the late 1700s, we had a physical anthropologist who would go around and he literally crack some skulls. Not in a scrapping kind of way. He would crack skulls as an anthropologist and try to figure out the cranial cavity of all of the different ethnicities. His name was Johann Friedrich Blumenbach. And so Johann Friedrich Blumenbach cracked some skulls from every ethnicity. And he says, look, there's 5 ethnicities. Now remember, he only dealt with the continents that had a decent population on them. There were 2 other continents. Their suspicion that they didn't even know those other 2 continents were there. This is early, mid-1700s. So he classified, he was the first renowned scientist to classify races. He said, let's just classify them as races, okay? People from Africa, let's call them Ethiopian. People from Europe, white Europeans, we'll call them Caucasian. People from, East Asia, we'll call them Mongolian. People from Southeast Asia and Indonesia and other places, we'll call them Malayan. And then people from, let's see, that's 4. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Did I miss one? Is that 5 or 4? That's 4. All right, and then people from Americas, from the Native Americans, he said, those are Americans. That's our 5 classifications. They were all based on geography. There was no thought about skin color at all. He says, we just need to classify them. Let's just come up with a way that we can classify humans and where they come from so we can better understand, he came from Africa, so he's Ethiopian, right? Very benign. There was nothing behind it. As a matter of fact, he kept getting asked questions from his fellow Europeans. What about those Africans? They look very different. I mean, is there something? And he says, no, look, I've done the cranial research. There is absolutely no distinction from an intellectual and cognitive capacity from those we would call Africans, Ethiopians, in any of the other ethnicities. None. Late 1700s. The work was done with the father, really, of physical anthropology, Johann Friedrich Blumenbach. His protege, however, really wanted to be part of the sort of aristocrat, European sect. So he says, look, so when Johann passed, he's like, I think we can rig this a little bit. We could say that there is a distinction in cranial function, that some ethnicities are not quite there. They don't have the intellectual capacity as others. And what he really wanted to do is elevate Caucasians. Yeah, this is true. And so he said, look, his name was Samuel Morton. And so he carried that on, and it just happens to coincide with the major writing of another anthropologist that had almost the exact same pedigree as Johann Friedrich Blumenbach, and that would be Charles Robert Darwin. Anybody familiar with Charles? All right. So Charles Darwin goes on this quest for 5 years, and he comes back and he says, look, I figured out the keys to life, man. I figured out, there is no God. I figured out, we all evolved from this, some kind of soup, and hey, we're just part of this, this thing that happened in the world, and we're all just evolving. So because there is no God, he says, look, there is no such thing as, Adam and Eve and, any of us having anything in common. We have nothing in common. He says, but actually there was, there was evolution that started in Africa. He said we all fundamentally came from there, but over thousands, tens of thousands of years in evolution, Africans, that African, when we move to other parts in the world and stuff, we tend to take on sort of the attributes of the environments that we're part of. And he said, because of that, a lot of us in Europe, we're big brain, baby. I mean, we understand how the world operates and all that. He says, now, those savages, literally, he called them savages, those savages in Africa, those apes and savages, and, those Ethiopians, those blacks, they're still subhuman. Charles Darwin, The Descent of Man, exact words. They're still subhuman. They haven't evolved, their heads, their cranial cavity is obviously but we, because we have, experienced the world, and we evolved from an agrarian state to more of a, industrialized state here in Europe. We experience more things. Our brain cavities have grown so much. We have the intellectual capacity, and therefore we, Caucasians, are the cat's meow, baby. We're at the top. Charles Darwin asserted for the first time in human history, never occurred to anyone else ever in human history, until Darwin said, we have a major distinction between ethnicities. Some are still subhuman. Africans. They're still trying to evolve. They're still trying to climb that scale. Some are just, like the Mongolians and the, Malayans and the native, they'll get there ultimately, but we Caucasians, man, we already got it wired. We are supreme. So a lot of us want to, sort of completely debunk white supremacy as an existence. There was, and there is, such a thing as white supremacy. And it comes by way, believe it or not, of atheistic mindsets. Because if there is no God and we all evolve, and we evolve at different rates and stages over time, then it sets it up to where one ethnicity can be above another. The only way that we're all equal is we believe the God of the Bible and Adam and Eve, because we're all brothers. So it was Charles Darwin that started this race idea and set up whites as being supreme above every other ethnicity. It is a thing. Today, that mindset still is pervasive, believe it or not. Not so much, white supremacy, but a supremacy of a particular race. See, after that happened, then all races said, look, we got to protect our interests. We don't want to be, looked at any kind of way. So we got to, maybe what we have to do is assert our supremacy. So all the races then start to, no, we're supreme, we're the best because, hey, we're black and we went through slavery and we all overcomers and look at us. We're resourceful and all that. We best. Y'all need to bow to us. Or we're Asians. We understand how the world works, and you guys need our intellectual and technological capacity. So, we're the best. Gone are the days when we used to look at one another as brothers and sisters coming from the same seed. Because we have this crazy idea about Darwinism that has infused, believe it or not, and I know you guys know, all of academia, K through 16, college, PhD level, everything has some level of Darwinism in it. Now it's infused our boardrooms. DEI basically says, look, we love you blacks, but y'all can't compete because y'all don't necessarily have the intellectual capacity. And so we need to level the playing field however we need to do it. We're going to just put you in these offices and you sink or swim. We're going to put you in our boardrooms. We're going to put you in this managerial position, and then we'll see what happens. All of this, I hope you're grasping what I'm saying, is racism. Anytime we believe that we're inherently better than another person, that, we're, oh, they're poor ethnicity, they're still struggling, they can't really, that's Darwinist thinking. All ethnicities can make it. We come from the same mother and father, Adam and Eve. We come from the same gracious God and Father who will give us the capacity to be resilient in whatever state we're in. And so I wanted to just level set so we can all begin to understand how incredibly manipulated all of America has become and how difficult it is for us to have conversations because of it. We have got to understand the root of this stuff. And we have got to have the fortitude, the capacity to stand on our own 2 feet and say, no, you're wrong. You're wrong. Yeah, really? Why am I wrong? Well, because you believing in this, this demonic fool, Darwin, and you trying to, overlay that onto my experience. What's the matter with you, man? We're all one. We're brothers. You understand? I hope I'm making sense to y'all. All right. So if you want to find out really chapter, verse, all the footnotes, go to Amazon, order Woke Up, and it's only a couple dollars. It'll go through all of that, and then it'll include all the other stuff about wokeism as well. But that particular history is vital and important because then that sets us up for all kinds of additional conversations we can have to start to help our friends and family, and neighbors, community members, and help them to get on the right track about this race stuff. This race stuff is tearing apart America. And if we don't get this thing right, man, we're going to be pretty messed up as a civilization, as a society. I don't know how much time I have left. Neil, I'm good? Oh, okay, good. So let me just make sure I didn't miss anything then. Let me go through this. I just want to be able to, let me see. Hold on one second, baby. Let's go through this. I just want to make sure I didn't miss any important data points. So Darwin and Darwin was really the predecessor of scientific, what they call scientific racism, where they quantify that, we can treat people differently because we are different. Everybody evolved in different rates and stages over time. So, hey, that's evolution, and we are different. So imagine what happened. Let's go through this a little bit. So Darwin comes out with his major findings in the mid-1800s. We had slaves. Most of the slaves, when they were captured and brought over here and sold to our plantation owners, they didn't really think that they were not even human because they put them to work. I mean, how could you have somebody that's not even human and put them to work and have them, take care of the whole plantation, right? So, but when Darwin's work came out, They were like, oh, wow. Yeah, they're still subhuman. So, God won't hold it against me if it's subhuman. If it's subhuman, I can probably do a little something, to that good-looking black slave over there. This is where because a lot of us are thinking, like, how were they so cruel? They read Darwin's work, and they said, look, I'm subhuman. God doesn't hold me accountable for what happened here. I got a free pass. It's not even human. I could work him to death. I could abuse him in whatever way. It's fine. No problem. And then they go and preach on Sunday. I get that all the time, too. How could they, say that they were a good Christian? Well, if they believed, because the number one scientist in the world, Charles Darwin, trying to ingratiate himself to the aristocrats in Europe, put this way over there that said, hey, we're the, we Caucasians are the best, and we're the, he did that on purpose. He already had Johann Friedrich Blumenbaum's work that said there's no distinction whatsoever. He already had the work. But he did that on purpose because he wanted to ingratiate himself to the upper crust in Europe. And from that time, he was renowned. Met the Queen and spent time with all the aristocrats. He was heralded. So the bottom line is he did it because it benefited him. And to this day, we're living with the disaster of that mindset. Let's see, what else can I say about that? He also, Darwin. When we get to questions and answers, you guys can ask me some questions, but we're not quite there yet. Okay, I think I just wanted to give you a little bit so you can get some extra context around racism and white supremacy. A lot of us would say there's no such thing. And I just wanted you to have a healthy appreciation of this history so you can actually quantify that these things actually did happen. And, depending on your mindset today, you could be a white supremacist. You could be. It depends on your mindset. If you say, look, Kev, I see you up there, but you don't talk like Frank Turek and my boy Neil Mammen. You kind of a brother. I could see a difference there. You don't have the intellectual capacity. Then you're probably a white supremacist because you're using a Darwinist idea. Does that make sense? I'm not trying to say anything, but I'm saying if you use a Darwinist idea like DEI, and I should know, I wrote a book on DEI as well. It's called DEI in 3D, giving you a 3D look at what DEI is and what it's not. And how, at the end of the day, it's not only racist, but it's fully Marxist, it's fully communist. But so that's where that comes from. That's a little bit of my background, a little bit of my books. You can find my books under Kevin McGarry or Dr. Mac, M-A-C, in Amazon. And, with that, I want to get my brother Neil up here. You're in for a real treat tonight. You got Neil and Frank Turek. These are my brothers. I love them. And I just like to be around them because based on osmosis, I can just grab some of that intellectual capacity. It's so good to be here. Thank you again, guys. Appreciate it. Thank you so much. Oops. Okay. I'll get it together. All right. Awesome. Yeah, there we go.
We will now be having Neil Mammen. Neil Mammen was born in Ghana, grew up in Sudan, Yemen, Jamaica, India, and Ethiopia. He's a bachelor's in computer and electrical engineering and a master's in solid-state physics and computer engineering. He's an ordained pastor, lives in Boise, and he is the president of the Values Advocacy Council, which focuses on engaging and getting Christians and pastors involved in politics. Neil is the co-founder and CEO of Every Black Life Matters, and he's the author of Who is Agent X? Proving God's Existence Without Using the Bible, and most recently the article on How Science, Reason, and Logic Can Lead You to the Gospel Without Using the Bible. He's always happy to speak at churches and youth groups. So, now welcome to the stage, Neil Mammen.
I think I'm on. Yeah, you guys can hear me? Great. Thank you. I got to explain why I am part of Every Black Life Matters. When we came up with the idea, my wife actually came up with the idea because we saw some friends, Christian friends, who were actually at the BLM rallies. And she said, I don't think they know that this is a Marxist organization. So she said, why don't you call Kevin up and ask him to get, he was working with the Frederick Douglass Foundation at the time. I said, have the Frederick Douglass Foundation do something and maybe start an alternative organization. And so I called Kevin up, and Kevin said, great idea. He calls back to the head office, and the head office, the Frederick Douglass Foundation, says, we'd love to help you, Kevin, but it's 2020 where we've got all our troops out in the different counties getting the vote out for Trump. We can't help you at this time, so you and Neil have to do it, because he knew who I was, the president did. So Kevin calls me up and he says, you know how it is, you go to your pastor, you go, Pastor, we need a parking lot ministry. And the pastor says, great, you're hired. All right? Well, that's what happened. Kevin says, I think you and I are doing it. And I said, Kevin, hang on. I don't think if you've looked lately, but I'm not black. He said, no, but you are the only African American I know. You see, all the rest of our team in Every Black Life Matter are not African Americans. They're just Americans. I apparently am the only African American because I was born in Africa. So that's how I ended up doing this. Don't blame me. But so today, I know you're not here to listen to me. You're here to listen to Frank Turek. A little secret. In 2020, I got an email from a young man I'd seen on Fox News. I had to remind Frank of this. I actually had to send him the email. It says, hi, I am trying to get hold of Frank Turek. My name is Charlie Kirk. And here's my number. So I called him back. I said, anyone can say they're Charlie Kirk. He goes, no, this really is me. I said, well, okay, I will take your number and I will call Frank and see if he wants to call you. So that didn't call me to get hold of me. But anyway, so today we're going to talk about, after the internet, after Charlie died, the internet was suddenly engulfed with a strange kind of courage. People who had never met him, never listened beyond a soundbite, never read a full paragraph, stood up behind their digital walls to declare their hatred of him. I mean, some of it had simmered before. We all know that. I mean, he wasn't really popular with the left. But 2 solid weeks in the news cycle, and people had had enough of this guy that they were hoping to get rid of. And so all the accusations came out that Charlie was a racist. And worse than that, a lot of people came out and said Charlie couldn't argue. They said Charlie was only winning on facts because he was using rhetoric. And he was using rhetoric with 18-year-old college students who didn't know how to argue. That's why he was winning. He said Charlie was winning through technique, not truth, through skill, not substance, through trickery, not tactics, not fact. But pause with me, let's set aside the noise for a second and ask a question. If Charlie only won because he was debating and arguing with kids, then what about these guys, Cenk and Bill Maher? And what about all the college professors who came out to argue with him? Were they not practiced in the skill of rhetoric? Well, I'm going to argue that they were not practiced in the skill of rhetoric because you keep using that word. I don't think you know what I don't think it means what you think it means. Right, let's be clear, what is rhetoric? First of all, rhetoric is the classical definition, is Plato, Aristotle, and Cicero all agreed that rhetoric is the disciplined art of using language to persuade, but through clear reasoning, factual accuracy, and moral purpose. Did you notice the last few words? Reasoning, facts, and moral purpose. Not manipulation, not emotional intoxication, moral purpose. See, true rhetoric does not ride on emotion divorced from grounding. Yes, it uses emotion, because that's important to convince and move the people. But it weaves fact, logic, and demonstration into a form that the listener can understand and process and respond to. See, classical rhetoric at its root is grounded, assumes that persuasion must be grounded and tied to reality. That which is true, that which is reasonable, that which corresponds to the world as it is. You see, without facts and logic, communication ceases to be rhetoric. It actually becomes something else entirely different. What is the word they were actually looking for? The word they were looking for is the disease of language called sophistry. Sophistry is persuasion without truth, emotion without evidence, cleverness without foundation. It manipulates instead of clarifies. It uses verbal acrobatics to hide empty premises. It hides truth. It hides facts. It takes a portion of the truth, cuts it up into pieces, and presents to you as though it's the full truth. But the moment you do some research and say, is this true? It falls apart. Today we see it as what? Propaganda, gaslighting, demagoguery, and of course, the big fallacy of them all, the ad hominem attack. Right? In fact, most of these fall into the logical fallacies. If you've done any work in college in logic, you will know the fallacies, but here's the irony of this all. All you have to do is call someone a Nazi or a racist. And that ends the conversation, but that is sophistry. That is exactly what they were doing, because in all of these things that I watched, they never said why he was a racist, except to give you some quotes, which I will cover now. I will cover in detail. And we will look at the irony of that. So, before we start, you have to remember. And by the way, remember this, memorize it, take a picture of this if you can. There are only two ways to refute an argument. For those of you who want to move over here, please do, because I realized when we started, we didn't know there was only one screen available, so please feel free to move if you want to. Because I have a lot of slides here. I have about 40 slides, so you may want to see them. Okay, so there are only two ways to refute an argument. Number one, you have to show the facts are wrong or incomplete in a relevant way. Okay? And number two, you have to show the logic is faulty. There is no other way to do this. Everything else, there is no third path. Everything else is a fallacy. So memorize this. If somebody says, well, you're a Nazi, you go, you have not refuted my argument. You've just used an ad hominem. You have to show my facts are wrong or incomplete, or my logic is faulty. There is no other way, young grasshopper. So, let me be clear. Tonight, during the Q&A session, our goal is not to overwhelm anyone with our sophistry. Yeah, we've done this a lot, Frank, a lot more than any of us. But I want you to tell you do not need to be an expert in rhetoric or to test, you do not need to be an expert in rhetoric to test what we're going to say. You just need to look it up on ChatGPT. I never trusted, though. You do not need a degree to debate, right? And if we're wrong, well, first of all, let me tell you what our foundation is. Our foundation is simple, the older, sturdier stuff: truth, facts, logic, reason, and the real-world experience that natural law has always affirmed. And if you struggle to articulate a question during the Q&A, if time runs short, if the line behind you is long for some reason, email me, email us. We're not here to win debates. We're here to illuminate, to win you, to win the mind, to win the argument. And let's be honest, I've been wrong before, and I will be wrong again. I've had people argue with me, and I go, you know what? That's a good point. Let me think about it. I won't admit it in front of you because I have too much of an ego. But I will go home. I will go home, and I will agree that you're right, and then I'll email you privately. No one is obligated to surrender their reasoning. So now let's begin the question, pressing the nation. Charlie Kirk and the accusation that statements he made reveal racism. Now, but to understand if Charlie was a racist, we first must understand the foundational principles of why blacks are in the condition they are. We have to understand what has happened to our black communities and why it's happening. And then we have to look at the solutions. And then maybe we will realize that Charlie was thinking about the solutions and not about what was nice to say. So before the accusations, you're like, okay, he's already making excuses for Charlie. No, I'm not, because you will see. So let's begin where honesty demands, with the plight of black America, with the reality that black plight exists. Now, a little promo here. Most of this is in the book that I wrote, really audaciously called How to Stop Racism in America. Right? And by the way, we will talk about MLK, and I wrote this book before the stuff about MLK came out. So or at least that we knew about it, had been confirmed. So let's talk about black plight, the reality. Unemployment, black 6.1%, national is 3.6. Poverty, blacks 24.8, whites 9.3. Black medium income is $48,000 a year. United States median is $68,000. Indian American median is $152,000. Go figure, right? Home ownership, right? Blacks 44%, whites 75.8. Incarceration, blacks 1,372 per 100,000. Whites only 235 per 100K. Literacy, black proficiency level is 17%. And 16% math proficiency. Okay, let's talk about murder victimization, right? In other words, how many blacks are killed? 21. Let me find this. Yep. Murder victimization. 21 blacks are killed per 100,000 versus whites only 4 per 100,000 in murders. Homelessness, 16.8 blacks, only 4.8 whites. College degrees, blacks 24%, whites 48%. Gang memberships. Blacks are 13% of the population, but they are 32% of all the gang members. Okay, now understand that. Not all 32% of blacks are gang members, but of the gang members, 33% are blacks, okay? Just so you understand that statistics. I had some guy come up to me after a talk like this, and he said, well, I said something like, 7 in 10 have this problem, and he said, well, I had this problem, and I'm fine. And I said, well, 7 in 10 won't understand statistics. Okay, 51% of homicides arrests, 51% of blacks are arrested for homicide versus, despite being only 13% of the population. On welfare, 48% on welfare, 18.2% are on whites. So black plight is real, you can't deny it. But the question that we want to ask, and the question that the country is asking, is what is the cause of black plight, right? Is it racism? Because that's what they're saying. It's racism that causes black plight. It's racism that put them where they are. It's racism that won't let them arise. That's why we have to do DEI, we have to do CRT, we have to do all these special programs, because it's racism that put them there. So that's what we want to look at. Now, here's the question. If it is racism, or some, and I've had this, some speculative, unmeasurable, generational trauma genetically embedded in them from the years of slavery. So get this right. Some genetic mutation happened while they were slaves that's passed on to all the blacks. Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for your suggestion. But if that was the case, then we would expect black plight to appear consistently across black history. So, well, the question is, were African Americans always in plight? The popular narrative says yes. From the time of emancipation to today, blacks have always been crushed under racism's heel. But what does the evidence show? Let's look at the post-slavery era. I'm going to pick an era that had the most racism, okay? Right after emancipation to the 1950s. Jim Crow was the law. Segregation was enforced. Anti-lynching laws were blocked repeatedly, almost entirely by Democrats. Blacks risked violence for voting, for speaking, for succeeding. Their schools, their professions, their neighborhoods, opportunities were all barred. If any group of decades could be considered the most racist, these were the decades, right? But here's what's very interesting. These were the decades that black Americans thrived the most. Let's look at why. Forbidden for centuries to learn, freed blacks devoured literacy. Parents pushed children to education with a resolve born of suffering. When white schools barred them, they built their home. Homeschooling, church school, community academies, black colleges, almost always private. By the 1930s, literacy amongst blacks was 70%. Compare that to 17% today. Let's look at employment and prosperity. In the 20s and 30s, black men entered industries everywhere. They went to white contractors who were many times racist. And they said, I can do the job that your white worker will do for half his pay. Now, green is a color that knows no racism. So the contractor said, I can double my income. I can double my profit. They were hired. Profit overcame prejudice. Blacks were hired. They learned those trades. They gained those skills. They became experts. They returned those skills to their own neighborhood. They were in demand even by the whites. They're like, hey, there's a guy who can do it far better than this white guy, and he's cheaper. They built businesses, they accumulated wealth, and we saw Black Wall Street. I talked to Clarence Henderson. He was one of the guys at the Woolworth's boycott. By the way, the Woolworth's boycott, the reason they changed and decided to serve blacks is because the blacks decided to boycott them, and they realized that 10% of their income came from blacks. They said, this is a bad idea. I'm not going to in front of the shareholders and say, we lost 10% of our income. And he told me that. He says, back at home, we had lawyers, we had banks, we had dentists, we had everything in our community. So, Black Wall Street flourished. Incomes exceeded modern minimum wages. A black dollar circulated 60 to 100 times in the community. Banks, hotels, theaters, luxury homes, schools of excellence, all black built, all black run. And guess who was not in sight? The government. The most scariest words in the history of mankind are, I'm from the government and here to help you. You know that 6 black families owned airplanes in Oklahoma, and they only had 2 airports. Churches were the epicenters of economic coordination, moral formation, communal unities. Black communities built hotels, mutual aid societies, and insurance companies like the Young Mutual of Augusta and North Carolina Mutual Life, which is still running. But here's what was really amazing that we don't see today ever. Walk through the vibrant black communities of the 1930s and you would see a truth that shatters modern stereotypes. Fathers everywhere. Fathers on porches with children. Fathers at the head of the dinner table. Fathers leading prayer. Fathers raising sons with discipline and daughters with dignity. African-American fathers like their Western African heritage stood as pillars of moral and spiritual stability. They were doing well. What changed? How did plight replace prosperity? Well, you might think, well, it was the Black Wall Street. But it wasn't. They rebuilt it within 2 years, better than before. And this time with lots of armed guards, so it couldn't happen again. So the KKK and the Democrats, who were helping the KKK, or were part of the KKK, realized they had to use a new weapon. They had to stop blacks from working. So they went to the contractors and the builders and all the tradespeople, and they said, you better stop hiring black people or we're going to come beat you up. But you know, there's thousands of businesses. You can't stop them all. So they said, we need a more powerful force than just us. We need the biggest stick there is in the world called government. And they found an idea that had worked in Canada to stop Chinese from people getting jobs in Canada, and what South African then under apartheid had stopped blacks from getting white jobs in apartheid, and it was called, anyone know? The minimum wage. Yes, folks, the origin of the minimum wage is racist. It was designed specifically to prevent black men from getting white jobs. It made it illegal to hire a black worker at any wage that he wanted. Suddenly the white contractor had no incentive left. Blacks were shut off. A generation of opportunity slammed shut. Why hire a black man if you're a racist and you got to pay him the same amount? Even today, the minimum wage, as Thomas Sowell says, blocks black. The effective minimum wage for young black men is 0. Because young blacks leave public school with a 17% proficiency rate. That means 83% of them can't read or write to do business. They cannot produce $15 an hour in value, so they're locked out of work completely. If there was no minimum wage, they could begin where they are, grow and rise, but the law forbids their first step. Let me tell you a quick story. I've started 4 startup companies, and one of my and we always start with no money, right? So we're starting the startup company. We've got no money, but we've got all these engineers working, some of them for free, some of them for a little pay. And I think, and my CEO, I was the chief technology officer, CEO says, we need some guy to do IT. I'm like, well, yeah, but we can't afford him. I said, I got an idea. I teach at the junior high and high school back at my church. Let me see if some high schoolers can be bribed into doing our IT for pizza. Well, strangely enough, there were 4 of them like, yeah, we'll come do your IT for pizza. So they come and do our IT, and then they're working on IT. They're doing all the IT, and then one of them says, can you pay us yet? I said, no. He says, well, if you can't pay me, the guy next door will pay me. Because I've learned all this experience. I'm like, oh, we'll pay you, we'll pay you. A few months ago, I saw that he had become the chief information officer of a major Christian university. I said, hey, congratulations, a promotion. He goes, oh, yeah. I just want to remember you to remember I started working for you for pizza. And then he said, thank you. Thank you. I wouldn't be here today otherwise. That would be illegal. I guess I could have been arrested back then, too, because it wasn't minimum wage, but I didn't care. Okay, but the greatest destroyer of the black family was not a mob. It was a president, Lyndon Baines Johnson. You see, Johnson faced a political nightmare. If you know anything about him, he was vice president of JFK. JFK gets killed. He becomes president. And JFK won by a tiny margin against Richard Nixon. And he knew that if he was going to go run in 64, he would lose everything because he was well-known racist. Why was he a well-known racist? Because in 1963, he said, and he had figured out, we know he was well-known racist because he said, I'll have them ends voting Democrat for the next 200 years. If you read the whole thing, you realize he had planned this out. And then he says, these Negroes, 1964, he says, these Negroes, they're getting pretty uppity. We've got to give them a little something, just enough to quiet them down, not enough to make a difference. He was known as a racist from Texas, and he needed to do something to get the South to vote for him because there was no way he was going to win otherwise. And so he advanced something called the Great Society. Government dependency as a policy. And he signed the Civil Rights Act with only 60% of his own party, against 60% of his own party who refused to sign it. It was the Republicans who got it signed and through. And so he managed to win in 1964. Right? So his next thing, so the first thing was the minimum wage. The next thing was his policy. In 1964, he sent over 100,000 social workers into black communities to persuade black women to remove fathers from the home and replace them with the government welfare check. Kevin and I have a friend, and I talked to a number of people, and they were about our age. And she says, I was 13 when that whole thing happened. And I remember my mom on the phone with a social worker arguing with him because my dad had lost his job, and the social worker said, kick that bum out of the house. I will get you twice as much per child. She said her aunt would get phone calls from the social worker saying, I'm coming over, move his shoes and his keys and his jacket so I can say there's nobody in the house. No man in the house. And the results were catastrophic. Almost immediately, before 1960, blacks were married at a higher rate than whites. What happens when the government replaces a husband? In the 1960s, black had a higher marriage rate, and it started dropping immediately. This only shows to 1980, but by 2000, we had over 70% of African Americans are born in a house without a father. And you'll see something interesting about these homicide rates. Look when they start to peak and rise. What happens when there's no man in the home? Studies show that fatherlessness, right? If governments start feeding and replacing the fathers are not there, so young men are unanchored by discipline. But the heart of a boy still seeks leadership. So if fathers don't provide it, guess who provides it? The gangs. You want your band of brothers, you want a father figure. Well, that's a gang leader, right? And so they go in with the gangs. But gangs need income. They need money to survive. Well, where do you get the money to survive? Well, crime and drugs. And immediately you see 88.6% of black victims are killed by black offenders. Crime leads to conflict. Conflict leads to murder. Statistically, Kevin has 10 times more chance of being killed by a black man than he has by a white man. But let's be honest, Kevin's not in a gang. There aren't black people out to kill him. That's the difference. I mean, Kevin grew up in Hunter Point projects, but his father was there. He talks about it in his books. Now, what happens when violence comes into a community? It gets into the what? It gets into the schools. Now, teachers are trying to survive. They're not trying to teach. And young men are not trying to learn. They're trying to get out and get esteem in the gangs. And so what happens when there are gangs and education falls, guess what happens to the crime rate? Crime rate goes out, and guess what happens to the incarceration rate? And these black men with kids are now put into prison, and the cycle continues and continues and continues, and you have a downward spiral. And into this chaos, we have Planned Parenthood, Margaret Sanger. In 1920, Margaret Sanger called blacks and browns weeds to be removed, and they placed clinics in minority neighborhoods. Ever wonder why? Because she wanted to get rid of them. In fact, there are 44 million African Americans today. 20 million have been killed in the womb. That would be almost 50% more blacks if not for abortion. You want to talk about a genocide? That's the genocide. So the question is racism keeping blacks down today? Or is it a culture forced upon them by government policy? Look, let me assure you, I was born in Ghana in West Africa. Fatherhood is a very important thing there. We have tribal leaders. Fatherlessness is not a culture there. Look, if it really was racism, if racism was to get people back, how much less would black Nigerians make in America? Turns out that black Nigerians make more money than the median American. You know who, a white group that makes less money? The Irish. They make less money than the median. Are we racist against Irish? Well, we were when they came here first. I shouldn't say we, but yeah. Now, how come brown Indians, if we're in a racist country, how come the brown Indians and the Chinese and the Taiwanese all make more money than most white people? In fact, the first time whites show up, it's South Africans. And that's probably all Elon Musk. I mean, Japanese were put in internment camps, and their farms and all that stuff taken away. There is no evidence that racism is primarily destroying the black family. The evidence clearly points to government. So how do we fix this? I point 6 ways in the book. A few I'll briefly mention. And I explain why DEI and CRT don't mention. But I want to cover the questions that we started this with all. Was Charlie a racist? So I'm going to read you the accusations and then the truth. And most often, just hearing the old quote will blow it out of the context. So here's the first one. If I see a black pilot, I hope he's qualified. Well, this is the accusation. Charlie says, this is the full story. So Charlie says, I'm sorry, if I see a black pilot, I'm going to be like, boy, I hope he's qualified. Corvette, but you wouldn't have done that before. Charlie, no, that's not immediate. That's not who I am. That's not what I believe. Neff, it's the reality that the left has created. I want to be as blunt as possible, says Charlie. This CEO just said a white qualified guy won't get the job. So I see this guy, I say, boy, I hope he's not an affirmative action student who landed half his flight simulator trials. Now you put in context. He's saying, look, what they've done is they've pushed this. Look, I'm a brown engineer, right? I don't want somebody to say, oh, he's only there because he's an Indian. Okay, that is true. Because Indians have all the VC firms. So if I want to get money, I go to an Indian and say, hey, I want some venture funding. He goes, oh, yeah, you're a Desi. Come on over. That only I'm telling you, it's fine. Okay. We have made a huge mistake when we passed the Civil Rights Act. Here's the paragraph, right? The Civil Rights Act of 1964 started with good intentions, but became the seat of permanent DEI-type bureaucracy. Once you tell government to manage fairness, it never stops. We made a huge mistake when we passed the Civil Rights Act in the mid-1960s. It has been weaponized into speech codes and quotas that violate liberty. Let me tell you something about the Civil Rights Act. It was good intentioned, but it accidentally did something subtle. Something no one except perhaps Barry Goldwater noticed at the moment. It overstepped both the Constitution and God-given rights that the Constitution is designed to protect. You see, government's role is to restrain evil by protecting your inalienable rights. If someone attacks you, steals from you, or violates your liberty, government must intervene. But no one has inalienable right to be hired by you. Your business is an extension of your labor and your property. The act should have said government may not discriminate, but instead it said private citizens may not discriminate. and must act as we command. That shift gave Washington authority not to protect your rights, but to override them. Do you see the danger there? It's insidious. To quote a phrase, this is how a republic dies. I'm sorry, they said democracy, but we're not a democracy. Okay, if it treated somebody else's desire for your employment as a claim on your property. Nobody has a right to be hired by you, because that's your property, your livelihood, and your labor. And if government can compel your private decisions, it can move from restraining evil to exercising control that the Constitution was specifically written to prevent. Besides, if you don't want an Indian eating at your restaurant, I don't want to eat there. I don't know what you're going to do to the food. It's probably bland anyway, but who cares? Okay. And that's what led to DEI and CRT having teeth. Okay, the Great Replacement is not a theory, it's a reality. And here's what he says, in context. The Great Replacement is not a theory, it's a reality. I'm not talking about race. 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 I'm talking about ideology and control. The left wants to replace conservative rural America with dependent voters. It's not about skin color, it's about what? Power. It has nothing to do with race. Okay, how about this? Prowling blacks go around for fun to target white people. You know what the problem was? The problem was nobody was reporting on this. Or a group of black teens were going around beating up white people. Now imagine it was a group of white teens beating up black people. Every newspaper would have it. Charlie was calling out the hypocrisy of the media. And then, of course, you don't have the brain processing power to be taken seriously. Well, sounds cruel, but if you look at the context, it just says, if we had said 3 years ago, this is Charlie saying, 3 weeks ago that Joy Reid, Michelle Obama, Sheila Jackson Lee, Ketanji Brown Jackson were affirmative action picks, we would have been called racist. But now they're saying it themselves. They're saying you blacks don't have the brain processing power to otherwise be taken seriously. You had to go steal a white person's slot to be taken somewhat seriously. And this is the problem. The minute you bring all this in, people are going, are you really there because you're competent? I don't want people looking at me when I run a company or when I'm doing something going, is he really a competent Indian? Is he really a good engineer? Did he really earn those patents? I don't want people saying that. And blacks don't want that. This is the infantilization of blacks. Kevin talks about that in his book. Okay, we're going to do a couple more, but first I want to bring up Kevin, because Kevin, you got the mic? Who's got the mic? Yeah. We want to talk, because Charlie said something about MLK, and I thought better Kevin address this than I do. So, because because as Biden said, I ain't black.
Give it to the brother with some color. Huh? Okay, all right. So, MLK, now, we have to understand something. We have to separate the good things from Dr. Martin Luther King that he stood for and some of the things that we found out in hindsight. Dr. Martin Luther King did stand for, did apparently have some good things that he stood for. Some of those things that brought Charlie, who's a man of faith, a man of God, and sincere about his faith, a lot of pause was when we realized that, through the FBI tapes and through the recent disclosures, that he had, orgies and prostitutes and beating up prostitutes, and he was in all kinds of stuff. This is not hearsay, this is from the FBI file. So Charlie had Dr. Martin Luther King, his legacy has been quote unquote whitewashed because it's not true. The other things that we realized is that he had some issues with plagiarism. Apparently his I Have a Dream speech was plagiarized from a 19th century Confederate speech that was given, and he took some of those lines out of there. So, judge not based on color, stamp, but content of character. That was one of those lines that was taken out of an earlier speech. So you had plagiarism. You had, even in his dissertation, there was apparently some plagiarism in his doctorate thesis. Then you had this, messing around with, this surly, sort of prostitution people, folks with mass orgies with he and his team. And then he said, look, the last thing that was really kind of the icing on the cake for Charlie with Dr. McGarry was he was seriously tied to some communist influences. And they actually helped write some of his speeches and helped position it in some of his main ideas. So these are things that, so when he was critical of Dr. Martin Luther King, he was critical, first of all, from being a man of faith and a man who believes that, hey, everybody, you know, if you're a man, if you position yourself as Dr. Martin Luther King, you're a reverend, you're a pastor, then your life needs to comport with that. And when he was seeing all this stuff, he said, look, that brother, he lost it. So that's where that came from. So I just wanted to provide some context around there. Some of you probably heard some of these things. Some of you may follow Chad O. Jackson, which if you're not, I recommend you do.
There's a movie coming out about it.
And there's a movie, and there's all kinds of stuff, FBI files that really, you know, sort of help you get context around talking about that. So that's where that comes from.
So just so you know, people who are faulty humans can do good things too. Right? So we have to understand that. We have one in office today, right? Not to mention David, King David, and a bunch of others. Okay, so let me go through the last two. If you're a WNBA, pot-smoking, black lesbian, you get treated better than the United States Marine. Okay, let's look at the whole thing. Look at who our media celebrates. If you're a WNBA, pot-smoking, black lesbian, you get treated better than a United States Marine. That's not equality, that's hierarchy by identity. Anybody disagree with that? I don't think so. Okay, and the last one today, I don't believe racism exists in America anymore. You know, I have traveled all over the world. As an engineer, I flew to many different countries to teach people how to use my chips. And I've done a lot of traveling. As a kid, as you know, I grew up all over the world. I have never been to a less racist country in my life than America. I mean, you want to talk about racism? Let's talk about the caste system. Right? You want to talk about racism? Go to the Middle East. I grew up in the Middle East. You want to talk about racism? Go to the Middle East. Okay, this is the least racist country I have. Now, yeah, there are jerks around. There are people who are stupid. That's fine. But the average American is not a racist because it's not taught to them that way. So, what is racism? When somebody says, I don't believe racism exists in America anymore, here's the passage. Here's the context. Systemic racism, meaning laws and systems designed to oppress minorities do not exist in America today. That doesn't mean individual racism doesn't exist. The idea that America itself is racist is false. So you can see the context of what he's saying. But I also want to take it a step further. Look, if something is systemically racist, that means the whole system is racist. Well, let's look at if the system is racist, that means the government is racist. The government are doing racist things. But did you know that 40% of the government is run by minorities? Now, you guys say, okay, unless they're all janitors, they're going to have some decision-making process in whether they get government services or they get arrested or whatnot, right? They're going to have some control in there. In fact, many of them are leaders of this. They're leaders of the government, and many of them are making decisions. How can we be a racist society when 40% of our entire government is run by people who are aware of the possibility of racism? Do you think they go, oh, well, yeah, I don't want to lose my job, so let's go ahead and just execute that guy? The assumption is racist, that those people in government would never do anything. The assumption says that blacks are too weak. It's an infantilization of blacks, and that's racist. And as we've shown, there seems to be no problems with Nigerians and Indians and Chinese and Japanese. Now look, I say in my book, look, I can walk up to a person, look him in the face and go, this guy is not African American, he's African. And sometimes I can guess, oh, he's Nigerian or he's Somalian. I can tell Somalians and Ethiopians a mile away, right? Because I lived there. I know these guys, right? So I know Sudanese. I walked up to one guy in the airport and I says, you're from South Sudan. He goes, how do you know? I go, because I grew up there, right? So, but most Americans can't. You don't think that somebody goes, okay, he's Nigerian, I won't be racist. Oh, he's black, I'm going to be racist. Well, I mean, that does not happen. It cannot happen. So here's the question that Charlie asked. What can a black person, equally trained, equally educated, not do today that a white person can? Nothing. In fact, in my book, I argue that the problem is you guys have been, the reason why Americans don't achieve so much is because they've been in America so long. You've gotten used to it. I come here and I go, oh my gosh, look at all the opportunity. Americans are like, what opportunity? That's why Elon Musk is the richest man in the world, because he's from South Africa. I don't know. So let me give you a brief. Oh, my battery's running. No, I'm supposed to be plugged in. Do I not have power here, folks? Okay, there we go. Let me give you a brief promo here. If you're interested in apologetics, especially for youth, if you're interested in how Jesus was involved in politics and how to vote in the next election, sign up on our webpage. If you want to find out more about me, Neil_BSU at vac.org. VAC is my organization. No Blind Faith is my ministry. I just came out with a new article. If you like logic and reason, I just came out with a new article. For years, I've been dealing with this issue. If we can prove, I wrote a book called Who's Agent X? Proving God Exists Without Using the Bible. That's actually simple, and it's there. It's right there. But I was thinking, if we can prove God exists, and Romans says that nobody is without excuse because the physical world shows you. I said, I wonder if we can get to the gospel using only science and logic and reason. And after years of thinking about it and figuring it out, I actually think I figured it out. So you tell me if I'm wrong, go to mammen.substack.com, read the one on it, and go through. It's a bit difficult, right? Because you have to go through every single premise, and it's about 28 points that gets us to there. But I believe I can prove that you can prove the gospel is needed without the Bible and without the witness, just from logic and reasoning. Go there, tell me what you think about it. I'll be very happy. And if you see a weakness in it, email me. We'll discuss it. Okay, so let me close. We began with a search for truth. We end with truth, I hope. Talk without truth is sophistry. We don't want sophistry. Rhetoric is nature anchored in truth and is illumination. Charlie's accusers relied on the former. We rely on evidence, history, and reason. So let's return to black plight. It's not caused by racism. At the height of racism, blacks were flourishing. Financially, educationally, communally, 70% literacy, strong families, prosperous businesses. As I know in my book, if America desires healing, which is very important, we must discover what black America once knew: faith, family, education, self-reliance, and the dignity of responsibility. And I go through how to get there. One idea I had is, now we give welfare to people without a father in the home. What if we change that around? You don't get welfare unless there's a father in the home. Or you get more welfare than father. Now, I don't like welfare, but we caused the problem with government money. Maybe we can undo some of it before we eliminate it completely. Now, imagine what fight that would be in Congress. No, we shouldn't give black fathers more money. Oh, I'd like to be on that side, right? So, there is a plan, it's there in the book, and when truth re-enters the conversation, there's hope that the plight can be reversed and the nation's wounds can be healed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Neil. I just want to give you guys all a quick reminder. If you guys are interested in being a part of our chapter here at Turning Point at Boise State, you can go ahead and follow our Instagram. It's TPUSA_BSU. We meet usually Thursdays at 6 in ILC 403. So I still have a meeting this next week due to Thanksgiving, but we'll be meeting the Thursday after that. So I hope to see you guys all there.
Thanks, Austin. Hey, we have a tradition here at TPUSA. We are correct.
Not politically correct. Did you notice? Where have you ever heard a talk like that before? Nowhere. Okay? Before I start, and we're going to spend most of our time on Q&A, I'm just going to say a few things. I want you to turn to the person next to you and the people watching out there on the internet. I want you to tell the person next to you where you were when you heard Charlie Kirk was shot. Go ahead.
can you remember where you were? By the way, the reason I have this is because I have no voice, okay? Been doing too many of these, so.
My wife's happy. But why can you remember where you were and what you were doing? A very significant event, a life-changing, significant event. I was just 25 feet from him, off his right elbow. And when we were driving in there, Charlie got some footage from someone must have had a drone over it. Sometimes maybe the advanced team for PR would put a drone up for a few minutes just to get some video. There was no drone up when the murder took place. But they sent this video footage to Charlie's phone, and he said, hey, look at this. This is like an hour before we're supposed to start. With thousands of people there already. Thousands of people to hear a guy answer questions. So, as I'm looking at the footage, I said, Charlie, you know, I don't like this place. There's too many buildings. He just kind of shrugged it off because he was brave and he knew that in order to reach people, in order to love people, you can't completely be secure. You have to make yourself vulnerable to a certain extent. And he knew there could be trouble, especially in an outdoor venue. But he decided that it was worth the risk. And of course, after it all happened, Dan, the head security guy for TPUSA, showed me the text. You may have seen Brian Harpole on Sean Ryan's podcast the past couple of days. Had the same text. The text was, I need people on the roof. University police, we got it. No, you don't have it. You should be ashamed. Butler, PA, all over again. So we got in there, we got out of the car, and there's all these young TPUSA people there. They wanted pictures with Charlie, so we stopped, took pictures, and we walked into the venue. It was like a Trump rally times 3. I mean, people were chanting, USA, USA, they were roaring and everything. I mean, you've seen some of the footage. Charlie starts flipping hats. Somebody hands me a row of hats. I start flipping hats. We're just flipping hats all over the place. He's like, welcome to the big leagues. Sits down. The first question you may have heard is about Mormonism. We were in Utah. We talked about that on the way over. Many of Charlie's staff are Mormons. He loves Mormons, as I love Mormons. Many people here might be Mormon, but we do have theological differences, so there's a question about theological differences. Charlie answered that. And then the next question, as you know, is about trans violence, ironically. And that's when the shot rang out. And I took a step toward him. But his security team was already there. And then I thought, there's probably going to be more shots. So I ducked. And the security team, they were there right away. They had him around the other side of the tent. I just went behind the tent and did what anybody would do. If you love somebody like that, you're going to get in the car. We got in the car. His eyes weren't looking at me. His eyes were looking straight past me. He was with Jesus already. Absent from the body, present with the Lord. That's the only saving grace. Because when that bullet hit him, he was killed instantly. And despite everything we tried to revive him, he wasn't going to be revived. He was already gone. The question now is, if there is a good God, why would he allow that to happen? Some people say God spared President Trump in Butler, PA. He turned his head just the right time. Why didn't he spare Charlie? Well, maybe it's because God doesn't exist. That's certainly possible, right? You say your God is all about love and faithfulness and he's good. Why did he allow this evil thing to occur? About a year and a half ago, Charlie got a text from a mutual friend of ours by the name of James Lindsay. James Lindsay is an atheist agnostic. And he texted Charlie and he said, I've been reading up on the communists in the past century. You know that they killed like 100 million of their own people in the past century? That's starting to make me believe in Satan. So Charlie texted back 4 words. If Satan, then God. Why did he say that? Because you can't have evil unless you have good, and you can't have good unless God exists. You see, if there is no standard of good outside of ourselves, we can't say anything is a degradation of that standard of good. You can't say anything's evil, because there is no such thing as evil unless there's something to degrade to call it evil, because evil's not a thing in itself. Evil is a lack in a good thing. Evil is like cancer. If you take all the cancer out of a good body, you got a better body. What happens if you take all the body out of the cancer? You got nothing. Doesn't exist. Evil is like rust in a car. If you take all the rust out of a car, you got a better car. What happens if you take all the car out of the rust? You got a Pinto. You got to be old enough for that. It doesn't exist. Or you might say the shadows prove the sunshine. In order to have shadows, you have to have sunshine. In other words, in order to have evil, you have to have good. Oh, you can have sunshine without shadows. You can have good without evil. But you can't have shadows without sunshine. You can't have evil without good. So if evil exists, then God exists. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but it's true. One interviewer on CBN asked me, what do you take away from this incident? Well, the number one thing I take away of this incident is that it was evil, which makes me realize there has to be good, which makes me realize there has to be a God, because there wouldn't be evil unless there was a standard of good that we're obligated to obey, and the killer didn't obey it. Now, we can ask questions like, okay, why would God allow it to happen? That's another question. But you can't say there's no God and still claim it's evil. It would be just your opinion. It would be just your preference. This is why C.S. Lewis, after going through World War I himself, said, there can't be a good God. There's too much evil in the world. And then he had an epiphany one day. In fact, he saw his best friend die in World War I. That made him think there was no God. But then, after talking to Tolkien, the guy that wrote Lord of the Rings, they were buddies. Tolkien convinced him that there's got to be good if there's evil. And so Lewis wrote in Mere Christianity, he said, as an atheist, my argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? You see, you wouldn't know what a crooked line was unless you knew what a straight line was. You wouldn't know what injustice was unless you knew what justice was. Something can't be not right unless something is right. So what we saw is undeniably evil. In fact, there are people on every college campus I go to who are claiming that certain things are evil and we must seek justice. And I agree. But many of the people protesting this are atheists. Do you know if there is no God, there's no good and bad? There are no rights and wrongs. There are no rights if there's no God. If there's no God, there are no rights. It's just your opinion. There's not only no right to same-sex marriage, there's no right to natural marriage. There's not only no right to abortion, There's no right to life. There are no trans rights. There are no women's rights. There are no Christian rights. There are no human rights because there's no right giver. This is why our founders realized when they began the country that they could only ground rights in God. So they said, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men were created and endowed by their government. And it doesn't say government. Endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And governments are instituted among men to secure these rights. Don't worry about this. This is obviously a politically correct AV system that does not like truth from my computer. So forget it. Not a problem. We're going to go to Q&A here in a few minutes anyway. So we haven't disproven God by this evil. Now the question might be, why would God allow this to happen? And when somebody asks me, why did God allow something to happen? All I can say is, I don't know, but I know why I don't know. God might have reasons I don't know about. I'm inside of time. I don't know anything of what's going to happen in the future. I know very little of what's happening now and very little of what happened in the past. Maybe God allowing this evil can bring forth good moving forward. In fact, this is something known as the ripple effect. Have you heard of the ripple effect? That every event that occurs in this life ripples forward to affect trillions of other events and billions of people. In fact, there's a story in the Old Testament about Joseph. Joseph in the Old Testament, Joseph sold into slavery by his brothers who don't like him because he's dad's favorite. And then he's treated horribly in Egypt. In fact, he's falsely accused. But then he interprets a dream for the Pharaoh properly, and the Pharaoh makes him number 2 in the land. And he puts a whole bunch of grain aside because he knows a famine is coming. And then the family that sold him into slavery, they leave Israel to escape the famine, and they come to Egypt, and Joseph recognizes them. And what does Joseph say to him? You remember? He says, you dirty rats, you're going to pay for what you did to me. No, he doesn't say that. He says, what you meant for evil, God meant for good, the saving of many lives. You can see the ripple effect in that story. The very evil that his brothers did later rippled forward to help them. How many ripples have we? We've seen more than ripples from this tragic event. We've seen a tsunami of good. It's never happened in the history of the world where the President of the United States and almost his entire cabinet and then friends of Charlie preached the gospel to 100 million people all at once, or maybe more, and those ripples continue. If Charlie were here today and we were to say, hey, Charlie, would you give your life to save 100 people? He'd say, yeah, I don't want to leave Eric and the kids, but that's what my life's about anyway. How about 100 million? How many millions were saved? I don't know. I'm getting emails from people. I got an email from a lady in Sweden. I'm a Christian now because of Charlie Kirk. Denmark, London, Australia. Have you noticed a bigger interest in Christianity? Have you noticed Bible sales are up like 40% since Charlie? The ripples are happening, and in some sense, it might be a tsunami. We can't trace where it's all going, but God has its reasons. And God allows these evil things to occur because if he doesn't allow evil, this really isn't a morally relevant world. In fact, I was at Michigan State. This had to be 15 years ago. And I was going through a program called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, which I do on college campuses a lot. And an atheist raised his hand during the Q&A. I knew he was an atheist because he sat through the entire 2-hour presentation like this. He didn't crack a smile once, and I had some pretty good jokes in there. Anyway, when his hand came up, I said, yes, sir. And he said, if there is a good God, why doesn't he stop all the evil in the world? I said, sir, that is an excellent question. Maybe because if he did, he might start with you and me, because we do evil every day. You ever notice when we start complaining about evil, we're always complaining about somebody else doing the evil? Hey, God, why don't you stop him? God, why don't you stop her? God, why don't you stop the shooter? God, why don't you stop Hitler? God, why don't we never say, God, why don't you stop me? Hey, if God were to stop evil at midnight tonight, would you still be alive at 12:01? I wouldn't be. God gives us free will so we can love. The problem is we can use free will to do evil, but God can redeem the evil. In fact, you know what Christianity is, if you think about it? Christianity is the answer to the problem of evil. If sin had never entered the world, there would be no reason for Jesus to add humanity to his deity and come to earth to save us. But he did, because we had sinned. Christianity is the answer to the problem of evil. God doesn't take our free will away. In fact, his solution to evil is not to take our free will away. What's his solution to evil? To quarantine evil in a place called hell. And everybody has a choice. He's not going to take away your free will. He's just going to prevent you from using your free will to hurt others at some point. You'll be quarantined. You'll be away from his presence. That's the ultimate destiny for all of us. Everyone's going to be resurrected. The only question is, where are you going to be resurrected to? You're either going to be with God or you're going to be separated from God. There's no other possibilities. In fact, at a different event in Michigan, University of Michigan, I had an atheist debating. I was debating an atheist, and he said to me, Frank, my mother was a survivor of the Holocaust. Toward the end of her life, somebody offered her the gospel, but she rejected it, and then she died. Is she in hell right now? So I said to him, Eddie, I don't know where your mother is now. I don't know if she had a deathbed conversion. But if she didn't accept Christ before she died, God is too loving to force her into heaven against her will. You see, what's the assumption behind this objection? That everybody wants to go to heaven? That's not true. Who's in heaven? Jesus is in heaven. Do you know there have been people running from Jesus their entire lives? What's he going to do in the afterlife? Go, hey, where are you going? You're with me now. Get over here. That wouldn't be right. You say, what's all this business about hell? Well, I used an illustration with the University of Michigan audience. I use it with you now. I asked the ladies a question. Ladies, here's the question I want to ask you. Ladies, have you ever had a man pursue you whom you did not want to date? Some of you are going, yeah, and he's sitting next to me right now. He will not leave me alone. Whenever I ask that question, the women always giggle and the men look at their shoes. Is she looking at me? Well, suppose this guy keeps asking you out. He keeps asking you out, and you finally say, now look, I like you, but only as a... Ladies, why don't you just stick the knife in and turn it? Every man has heard the dreaded friend rejection. Gentlemen, if you ever hear the dreaded friend rejection, move on. She's not interested. In fact, I have some shocking news for you. She doesn't even like you as a friend. Ladies, am I telling the truth here? Yeah. Because if you really were interested, if you really did like him, you'd be interested, but you're not. Okay? Well, suppose it doesn't deter this guy. He keeps asking you out, and he finally says, look, I love you so much, I'm going to force you to love me. Ladies run screaming from the building. Didn't he force you to love him? No, love by definition must be freely given. So if he truly did love you, what would he do? What would he do? He would leave you alone. That's what God does for us. He sends us cards, letters, and flowers. He sends us creation. He sends us conscience. He sends us Christ. He sends us a Bible. If you're a Muslim in a far-off land, he may send you a dream or a vision. You know, Neil used to live in Yemen many years ago. Yemen, garden spot. And there are people in Yemen, there are people in Egypt, there are people in Afghanistan, there are people in Pakistan, there are people all over the Muslim world now having dreams of the man in the white robe. It's Jesus. But if God does all that, and you keep saying, no, 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 I don't want you, God will give you up to your own desires. He will leave you alone. That's what hell ultimately is. It's separation from God. You say, what could be so bad about that? Well, look, everybody, whether you're a Christian or not, you get some of the common grace of God. What's the common grace of God? Everyone, as rain falls on the just and the unjust. Everyone experiences relationships. You might experience hope for a future. You might experience love, all these things, whether you're a Christian or not. But I want you to imagine a place where there is no love, where there are no relationships, where there is no hope, where there is no future, where there's just stone cold narcissistic self-absorption. That is Capitol Hill. No. That is hell. You're separated from the ultimate source of goodness by your own choice. This is why C.S. Lewis famously said there's only two kinds of people in the end. Those who say to God, thy will be done, and those to whom God says, thy will be done. So at the end, the solution to the problem of evil is he doesn't take away your free choice. He just quarantines you in a place where your free choices can't hurt anyone else. That's a place called hell. So in the afterlife, there's two sections, smoking and non-smoking. And you want to be in non-smoking. Now, we could say a lot more about this problem of evil. There's so much to talk about, but questions are more interesting than lectures. So why don't we go to questions? And if you have a question for Neil or for Kevin, we'll put them in the front seat up here, so if a question comes up for them, they can just pop up and answer it. It doesn't have to be just for me. So since no one likes to ask the first question, we're going to move on to the second question in just a minute. But Clint is getting the microphone ready. So, I got to say one thing before this happens here. As we all know, Candace Owens is spinning a lot of suggestions that there's all sorts of conspiracies out there about who killed Charlie. It's fine to ask questions. It's fine to suggest that maybe this happened, maybe that happened, but it's not fine to insinuate that people are guilty of murder or they're in some sort of murder conspiracy unless you have really strong evidence. My friend Mikey McCoy, whom I talked to today, is getting death threats. I get what appear to be death threats. You never know what can happen to you. In fact, before Charlie, these gentlemen were not with me. Before Charlie, we didn't even have a police officer in the back of the room. Why do we need that now? The Bible is very clear. You need two witnesses to convict somebody. You don't gossip. You don't slander people. Unfortunately, I think too much of that is going on. So far, I've heard that Candace and others, it's not just Candace, have suggested Netanyahu killed him, Israel killed him, Trump killed him, TPUSA killed him, Mikey McCoy, his dad Rob McCoy had something to do with it, the FBI, Egypt. I heard France today. I thought all France did was surrender. Now, let me ask you a question, ladies and gentlemen. Unless those possible culprits in Charlie's murder all work together on some grand conspiracy, that most of what is being said about this has to be false. Do you see the point? If you're going to suggest all these different people are involved, they can't all be involved. It strains credulity to say they're all somehow involved. Maybe one of them did it. But that means most of what's being said about this is false. And what if the guy who actually has been charged with the crime really did it? Then every single thing that is being said regarding conspiracies, if he acted alone, is certainly false. Now, the trial is probably not going to be for at least another year. We can't keep spinning conspiracy theories without evidence. People are going to get hurt. So I plead, if you're watching this kind of stuff, or you know people that are, you need to say, hey, it's okay to ask questions. It's not okay to insinuate people are guilty unless you have really strong evidence. In fact, if I were to say, I really think Candace Owens did this. I really think she did. You know why? Because Charlie stopped inviting her to the big events. And she thought if she could get rid of Charlie, then maybe they'd ask her to be the head of Turning Point. And she's bringing all this up, citing all these other people to cover her own tracks. And I really think she's jealous of Erica too. I think she's the one that did this. This all checks out. Would that be fair? No, it's not fair. It's ridiculous. I have no evidence for it. But I submit to you, that appears to be what she's doing, knowingly or unknowingly, to people for which she has no evidence they were involved. I need to say one other thing about this. Candace makes a big deal of Mikey McCoy turning away and immediately getting on his phone when Charlie was shot. She said there's only 3 possible things you can do in a situation like this. You either run toward the problem, you run away from the problem, or you freeze. Candace Owens doesn't know what she's talking about here. Because these men in these rooms will tell you that when a traumatic event occurs, if they're trained to do something, they automatically do it. I was in the Navy. We had emergency procedures. You practice those emergency procedures over and over again, so when the disaster strikes, you don't even have to think. You just do it. Why did I run to get in the car? Because I thought beforehand, if Charlie ever gets shot and I'm there, I'm going to do whatever I can to help. Didn't even need to think about it. Charlie drilled into Mikey, who at the time was only 23 years old. Drilled into him. If anything ever happens to me, the first thing you do is call Erica. Why would he run to Charlie when Charlie has 6 guys around him carrying him to the car? All he would do would be get in the way. Mikey did exactly what he was trained to do. Now, once the trial comes out, we'll find out the truth, the ultimate truth. But let's not insinuate people are guilty unless you have really, really good evidence. Oh, I have to say this too. Sorry, I just keep going on. But people don't seem to understand how prosecutions work. I mean, you had the case here with Kohlberg. What's his name? Kohlberger. How many people were spinning conspiracy theories about that and frustrated because we weren't getting enough information from the prosecution? My friend J. Warner Wallace, who has prosecuted many cases, he's a cold case homicide detective. I had him on the show about a month ago to talk about these conspiracy theories. He said the prosecution will never reveal what they have before they have to. Why? Let me just give you one example. Suppose they're investigating a second shooter, and I submit to you they probably are. Why? Because in the trial, the defense team is going to say, did you investigate the second shooter? Yeah, we did. But if they come out and say, we're investigating a second shooter, if a witness comes forward and says, oh, I saw the second shooter, they don't know if that witness really saw the second shooter or that person is making stuff up so he can make a name for himself. In the jury pool, they can't tip off the defense. The prosecution's job is to convict the real killer. The prosecution's job is not to have an ongoing soap opera on YouTube to tell you what they have. That would defeat their responsibility of convicting the real killer. And I can tell you they are tracking down conspiracy theories. Why? Because I was the subject of one of them. And I was the guy in the white hat next to Charlie, who people said that I was signaling the shooter, which is the stupidest thing in the world, ladies and gentlemen. If a shooter is on a roof somewhere, he can't see me anyway if he's looking through a scope. I mean, here was Charlie. I was about right where Ty is here. He can't see me anyway. And why would he need me to, or anybody to signal who Charlie Kirk is? Charlie Kirk's the only guy under the tent with the microphone. So the FBI called me. Said, sorry, I have to ask you this. I'm so sorry, but were you signaling the shooter? Yeah, I was telling him to steal second base. I mean, why do people believe this stuff? It's ridiculous. So they are checking into conspiracy theories, but they're not going to tell you about it, because if they tell you about it, it defeats what they're trying to accomplish. And that is find and convict the real killer. All right, let's go to questions right here, if we could. Yes, sir. What's your name again?
Hello, my name is Charles.
Charles, go ahead.
I have a specific apologetics question for you. When I'm evangelizing on campus, I often get asked questions about the science versus faith kind of questions.
Yeah.
I know the Bible's not true because it conflicts with the ideas around the Big Bang and evolution. I feel a little morally torn. I understand that the first 3 chapters of Genesis are poetry, and some Christians take that to say that it's completely symbolic. And I know other Christians take it to say, no, this is more literal. We should take the creation story literally. And I want to be able to tell this atheist that I'm talking to that, you know, there's Christians that believe that in evolution and the Big Bang, and they believe it's poetry. But I also don't personally think that's true. I was just wondering, how do you handle this conversation? Should I even give up on that?
I would simply ask the question, do you believe the universe had a beginning? And see what they say. Because most atheists and non-atheists will admit, yes, the universe had a beginning. If the universe had a beginning, if space-time and matter had a beginning, what could have caused space-time and matter to have a beginning? Only something that transcends space-time and matter. In other words, the cause must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful to create the universe out of nothing, personal in order to choose to create, because to go from a state of nothingness to a state of creation, someone had to make a choice, and only persons can make choices. The cause would also have to be intelligent to have a mind to make a choice. And so I always ask audiences, I say, when you think about a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent cause, who do you think of? God. And they'll say, well, how do you know it's the Christian God? Because it could be Allah or some other God at this point. And the answer is, I don't know it's the Christian God. You don't get all the way to Jesus from what we call the cosmological argument. It could be the Christian God. Now, if you then look at evidence for the resurrection of Jesus, which we spend a lot of time on in the book, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist over there, and we realize Jesus did rise from the dead, then we can say that the same being that walked out of the tomb 1,992 years ago is the same being in whose divine nature created the universe out of nothing. You don't get there with the one argument, but you get a being which could be the God of the Bible. And if they're going to challenge the question or challenge the claim that the universe had a beginning, I might not even use a scientific argument. I may use what's called the Kalam cosmological argument and ask them, if there were an infinite number of days before today, would today ever arrive? What's the answer? I know this can give you intellectual constipation if you think about it. But no, today would never arrive, because you'd never get to this day, because if there's an infinite number of days before today, you'd always have to live another day before you got to this day. But today is here, so there can only be a finite number of days before today, which means time must have had a beginning, which means whatever created time must be outside of time. And if you're outside of time and you don't have a beginning, do you have a cause? No. So the question, who made God, makes no sense, because God is the unmade creator. He's the uncreated creator. He's outside of time. There has to be an uncaused first cause. Turns out to be the uncaused first cause really does appear to be the God of the Bible. And the Bible gets it right. It says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Okay? Now, Neil has a little book on his table called Who Created, or Who is Agent X, which gets into some more technical details of that argument. So you can get the atheist book or that book or both if you want to go further. But I might also say one other thing about science and faith. Maybe something you can say to this man is, you could ask him, what is science, and see if he can define it. Because really, all science is a search for causes. You know, we're trying to find what particular cause caused a particular effect. And if he says, well, science says this or science says that, you need to stop him and say, no, science doesn't say anything. Scientists say things. Right? Because all data needs to be gathered and all data needs to be interpreted. And who does that? Scientists do that. And sometimes scientists allow their philosophical biases to control how they interpret the data. For example, if you're an atheist, well, let me back up. If you're a theist, if you believe that God might exist or does exist, you're open to two types of causes. You're open to a natural cause or a non-natural, an intelligent cause, right? But if you're an atheist, you've ruled out intelligent causes before you look at the evidence. So no matter what effect you look at, the only game in town, the only possibility due to your philosophy to be that cause is a natural cause. You say it's got to be a natural cause. Is that a result of the evidence or a result of the philosophical presupposition that you have where you've ruled out the only other alternative? Yeah, so too often it's philosophy, or people say their science is really just materialistic philosophy that is sugar-coated with the word science. Does that make sense?
Makes a lot of sense.
All right, thank you.
And
you guys can line up behind him. You don't have to wait for him to sit down.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Way back there? No. He's like, is there anybody else coming? Yeah.
Hi,
Yes, sir,
Frank.
what's your name?
My name's David.
Hey, David, go ahead.
I have a question on behalf of my 10-year-old daughter who's probably watching online right now.
Hey, 10-year-old, what's her name?
Edna.
Hey, Edna, how you doing? Go ahead.
She's quite the philosopher, and she would like you to answer the question of how can we know that we are not in a dream right now and that our dreams are reality?
I think we're out of time. Mm-hmm. How do we know we're not in the matrix is basically the question. You know, there's really no way of knowing that. We all could be in the matrix. But you know the reason I don't believe it? Because it's stupid. Okay? No, but really, the only way that you can know you're not in a dream is for you to get outside of the dream, right? The only way to know you're really having a dream is for you to wake up, right? You got to get outside of the dream. How do you get outside of this reality? You can't, unless we're in a dream and we wake up tomorrow. You know? So there's no way of disproving it. But why think that's true? You would need evidence to think it's true, and I don't see any evidence to say it's true. So I just prefer to use common sense. Does that make sense? Okay. You know what? I've learned doing this long enough that kids have the best questions. They ask questions that parents go, oh, no, I don't know. You know what? I don't know. Gee. All right. Thanks, David. Hey.
Howdy. My name's Cade Sivak. I'm actually the government relations officer with our chapter of Turning Point USA.
Yes, Turning Point USA, ladies and gentlemen. Yes.
So we've been fortunate enough to have an amazing amount of outcry of support from our local community here in Idaho. But one thing that we've seen come from this event is people that want to take it and throw it in the dirt and make fun of Charlie and make fun of the event. What would be your response to people that wish to take this and joke about it?
Well, I think it's very sad, and it shows that there is a problem in their heart that they haven't dealt with. Because if you're celebrating the murder of an innocent man, you've got some demons you need to deal with, no matter what their political views are. I'm so tired of people calling Charlie Kirk a fascist. Yeah, you know, a typical fascist gives the microphone to his opponent and says, please make your case, I'll listen. That's what fascists do, of course. I mean, it's so absurd. When we were at Berkeley last week, the Antifa showed up, you know, the anti-fascists. I mean, if irony could kill, they'd be dead, because they're the ones that are trying to shut down anybody that disagrees with them, which is what fascists do. So I would pray for such people. Jesus says, pray for your enemies. And it might not even be worth having a conversation if they're not open to a conversation. You know, Jesus famously said, do not cast your pearls before swine, lest they trample you to death. Now, when he said that, that's pretty strong language. He's not saying they're not made in the image of God, but they're acting like swine. And so it's better to move on to somebody else who's more open. By the way, this is also true in churches, ladies and gentlemen. I'm wondering, well, let me just say a couple things about this, about what is the purpose of church. What is the purpose of church? Paul says in Ephesians 4, the purpose of church essentially is to equip the saints to do ministry. In other words, yes, to worship God, but to equip the saints to do ministry. In other words, the purpose of church is to make disciples who are ambassadors for Christ out in society. The purpose of the church, shock, I know, is not evangelism. Not that evangelism can't be done in church, it can be. But if the focus of your church is evangelism, you wind up never making disciples, because what do you wind up doing? You wind up watering down the message in a bait and switch tactic to try and get people to become Christians, because you don't want to drive anybody off. So you're never going to talk about the hard issues. In fact, if you were in a church the Sunday after Charlie was murdered and your pastor didn't say a word about it, I could submit to you, I'm almost positive you're in the wrong church. You don't have the courage to talk about what's on everyone's mind, a man that was murdered, who was preaching the gospel at his last breath, and you're not going to say a word because you're afraid some people might be offended. They're offended at things he said because they were taken out of context, as Neil showed us. And instead of correcting the false idea that is in the mind of your congregants, you're just going to make believe they're true. No. Pastors, if you're going to have some sort of evangelistic outreach, that's fine, but don't orient your message to the far left. They're not even open. They're not even going to be there. You know, studies have come out recently that show that people who are conservative but not religious, about half of them are open to religion. They're open to Jesus. Only about 10% of the left are open to religion. Why, if you're reaching out to a community, would you orient your message to people who are not open and probably are not there, when you can orient your message to people who are open and are there? As Pastor Rob McCoy said at Charlie's memorial service, that the people who are conservatives but they're not Christians, once they taste the streams of justice, they want to trace those streams back to its source. What's the source of justice? God himself. So, the people that are far left, pray for them and move on. Everybody else, try and reason with them. Can we have a discussion? Can we talk about this? And there are two questions that you always should ask people. And when they make a charge, you know, the first question should be, what do you mean by that? Nick Neal was talking about, and Kevin was talking about racism. As soon as someone calls you racist, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by racism? And then next question, what evidence do you have for that position? How'd you come to that conclusion? Oh, well, I saw him say this. Did you read the whole context? Did you watch the whole thing? Just ask questions. And if you ask questions, then maybe you can get somewhere. Make sense? All right, thank you. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Hello, my name is Zane, and I'm a current student here at Boise State University.
Yes, sir. By the way, very well-dressed student, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
Go ahead, sir.
I had a question about sin today.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering what advice you give to Christians who are trying to combat habitual sin.
Habitual sin.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Jesus said, if you love me, you'll follow my commandments. If someone is a Christian in habitual sin and you're not convicted about it, chances are you're not a Christian. If the Holy Spirit is not convicting you of sin, which is one of his roles, you don't have the Holy Spirit if you're in sin. Doesn't mean we don't sin, we do sin, but when we do sin, we feel convicted about it. So if you're convicted about sin, then you need to renew your mind, as Paul says in Romans 12. You need to put away things that are causing you to go down that road. Sometimes it might be the internet, right? You need to get accountability partner, and you need to do a lot of prayer. If it's very severe, you can get spiritual counseling from a Christian counselor, and start with a pastor. But all of us still have that sin nature that we need to crucify. And that's what the sanctification process is, right? None of us have reached perfection, and we won't until we're in glory. But we should be progressing toward the image of Jesus. As Paul says in Romans 8, he says, all things work together for good to those that love God and are called according to his purpose, ultimately to be conformed to the image of his Son. By the way, that's another good outcome of evil. When you go through evil, you often grow. You grow in character. You grow as a child of God. You grow in the likeness of Jesus. You know, Jesus learned obedience through suffering. The guy that didn't have a sin nature, he learned obedience through suffering. If he had to learn obedience through suffering, how about us? We have a sin nature. We still need to learn obedience through suffering. Does that help? All right, great question. Thank you. By the way, when you get questions like that, you know that's coming from a Christian. Because how often, can we be honest about something here before we go to the next question? You ever been to a prayer meeting or you're at a small group? All right, let's open it up for prayer. Who has any prayer requests? Can we be honest? 95% of the prayers are, Aunt Mildred has a bad knee. Right? I have gout in my ankle. Oh, we'll pray for that. Does anybody ever say, I'm struggling with pornography? Does anybody ever say, I want to dope slap my workmate all the time? Does anybody ever say, I was short with my wife again? No. We highlight the sins over which we have no control, which aren't really sins. I just live in a fallen world. I have a fallen body. Can you pray for me? That question he asked is a serious question we all ought to be struggling with. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Dr. Frank, my name is O'Neill, and I do have a question for you since you were once a Catholic and then you moved on to evangelical. What do you think, in your opinion, then, that now that we have many denominations, which parts of the Bible as a Christians we're going to take it literally as it's written, and which parts we're not supposed to? Because that's like where the most of disagreement comes among all of denominations.
Say the last part again.
Which parts of the Bible?
No. Right after that, you said something the most.
That's where the most of division among all denominations comes from, where they disagree on the interpretation of the scriptures.
Yeah, everything in the Bible is literally true, but not everything is expressed literally. Like when it says Jesus is the door, we don't think he has a doorknob and hinges. In fact, much of what John says are metaphors. Jesus is the door. Jesus is the shepherd. Jesus is the bread of life, right? These are metaphors, and we know they're metaphors. Otherwise, it would make no sense. He's not really a shepherd. He's not really a door, right? He's not really made of bread. So when we look at these passages, we have to interpret the Bible properly. And I know you may be getting at John 6. Is that what you're thinking about? With the Roman Catholics will say that's the Eucharist, that's Jesus' literal blood and flesh. And not all Protestants, like Lutherans, will say transubstantiation is true, but other Protestants will say no. Look, this is not something that's an essential of the faith. Christians and Catholics can disagree over that and still be brothers, right? It's not at the top of the doctrine list, but it is an important thing. But I think when Jesus is saying, this is my flesh, he's holding it up at the Last Supper. How could it be his flesh when his flesh is holding the bread? Is he in two places at once? No, it's a metaphor. He's been using metaphors throughout the entire book of John. Now, it's okay to think transubstantiation is true. I'm not saying it's a heresy, but I'm not dividing with a Catholic over that issue. I might divide with the Catholic over the practical implications of almost never preaching the gospel. Because I had this situation with a friend of mine, Jimmy Aiken, who's a Catholic apologist, had to be a year ago. I was on his podcast, he was on mine, and I said, Jimmy, I was brought up in the Catholic Church, went to hundreds of masses. I have never heard a priest say the gospel in a homily in hundreds of masses until the last mass I went to, and that was my father's funeral, where the priest came out and they said, I talked to Frank yesterday, he's accepted Jesus as his Lord and Savior, so on his sacrifice he's in heaven now. So I asked Jimmy, I said, Jimmy, why have I never heard a priest mention grace? Ever. You know what he wrote back to me? Well, it's in the Mass. That was not my question, Jimmy. It may be in the Mass. I'm not talking about the Mass. Because we all know that when liturgy is said over and over again, sometimes we don't really dwell on it. And Jesus said, don't pray in these repetitive prayers. Why doesn't anybody from the pulpit, in the 7 minutes he has to talk about a sermon, mention why Jesus came and how we get to heaven? Why is that? Yeah, please. I still haven't gotten an answer yet.
I'm not a pastor.
I know, but are you Catholic?
Yes, and that's where I struggle too with the Catholicism as well. That's where I get a lot of struggles and inner questions, inner conflicts in my thoughts. When I'm like, a lot of things makes no sense, and pastors, when you ask them, they make a lot of excuses instead of going through straightforward answer coming exactly from the Bible. And a lot of their answers will refer to a lot of history of the church and the fathers, but never rarely they would use the scriptures. And that's really a big problem, because if the scripture is an infallible, inherent word of God, wouldn't that be more important than anything else in the world?
Well said. Yeah, welcome to Protestantism.
You mean Christianity in general? Thank you, I've been there already.
All right, thank you so much. God bless you. By the way, let me say one other thing about that. It's a very great question you bring up. I know that some Catholics, because I went to Catholic high school. Why? Because I lived in New Jersey and it's the law. But some will say, but look, we have advantages because we have a pope, and the pope can interpret the scriptures for us. And that may sound like it solves a problem, but it really doesn't. Why? Because whatever the pope says, we still have to interpret. Why don't we cut out the middleman? We know that the people that wrote the Bible were inspired. Why don't we just interpret what they said rather than interpreting what somebody else said about what they said? Just cut the middleman out. Now, I'm not saying a pope may not get it right, or other expositors and scholars won't help us. They will. But the whole idea that we have one guy who can tell us what it means doesn't help, because we still have to interpret what that one guy said. Does that make sense? All right, thank you. Yes, sir.
So I had a question written down on my phone. Yeah.
Hey, Kyle.
Yeah, you got it. I had a question.
I know Kyle's aunt. That's how I know his name.
Hi, Cindy.
Hey, Cindy.
So I had a question written down on my phone. I'm not going to read it, and it's primarily because of what you answered of what that last guy just said.
Okay.
So lifelong Protestant. I'm 27 years old. I've been digging a lot into the Catholic Church, and I find a lot of the arguments compelling, actually.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I guess I'm not up here to really debate about those things, although I'm open to that. My question really is, as a Protestant currently, what reservations and what advice would you have for someone who's considering becoming a Catholic?
Well, one problem is the problem we just talked about, that I never hear grace in the Catholic Church. And that's how we're saved. That's Ephesians 2. And Jesus said, the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. I don't hear that. That's why he came. So can you be saved? Look, I'm a Protestant, so I get mostly Protestant questions, and sometimes I get a question, do you think Catholics can be saved? And I usually say, I even think some Baptists can be saved. Okay? Because it's not where you go to church that gets you saved, it's whether or not you've accepted what Christ has done. You've repented and accepted what he has done. So if you feel like you are growing in Christ in the Catholic Church, that's fine. Okay? Let me give you some positives of Catholicism. Number one, Catholics know how to build a church. Protestants build these warehouses, and the pastor gets up with skinny jeans and a fog machine, and it looks like he just cleaned his garage. There's no reverence. He's up there giving some sort of hip motivational talk, which you can watch at a TED Talk on YouTube. Sorry, not interested. You're not helping me become a disciple. Catholics have that advantage of great churches, reverence in the service. So I think Protestants can learn from that. Where I think the problem comes in is more doctrinal. And the idea that this is still in the Council of Trent, which is like 1545 in response to Luther. They essentially said, anyone who believes you're saved by grace alone, may that person be anathema. Well, you know what that Council of Trent just did? They just excommunicated the Apostle Paul. Because that's what the Apostle Paul said, that you're saved by grace. So the doctrinal issues are very important. And let me recommend a book to get. It's written by my co-author, Dr. Geisler. You have Roman Catholics and Evangelicals? Okay. Let me just ask you, what do you think is the best argument for Roman Catholicism being the true church?
Well, first of all, I think as a Protestant, I had a lot of misconceptions about the Catholic Church that I believe to be true that I found are not true.
Like what?
It's basically the main differences between Catholics and Protestants. The Eucharist, Mary, the Deuterocanon.
What about grace?
I think, so Protestants have sola fide, right? Faith alone.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you think about sola fide, when you ask a Protestant what they mean by that,
mm-hmm.
they will either say it's faith alone, you can go do anything you want after that. You can go shoot people.
The Apostle Paul said
right.
that's nonsense.
Yeah, it's totally wrong.
Yeah.
I agree.
Mm-hmm.
But when you get into the nitty-gritty about what that actually means, you kind of back into a Catholic position of like, yes, your faith is required to be saved, but you still have to be in cooperation with God's grace. You can't turn away from his grace, commit mortal sin, and that's basically turning away from God.
Well, that's an argument over once saved, always saved, maybe?
Yeah.
I don't know, but that would mean... The problem would be that somebody like Peter couldn't be saved then, who's supposed to be the first pope. You see, so that wouldn't make any sense if I'm understanding what you're saying, because Peter denied Christ. And then Paul had to dope slap him in the book of Galatians. Okay? Okay.
Not wording it correctly. I think what I found to be the most compelling in my research is the early church. It seems the early church was Catholic.
Well, Catholic just meant universal.
Right.
Rome did not assert its authority until after 500 AD. So there was no Roman Catholic Church in the first century.
Right, but what I mean by what the early Christians practiced is like you can't find a early church father that held the view that the Eucharist was merely symbolic.
Okay, but it doesn't matter what the early church fathers believed. What matters is what the scriptures teach.
I think it does matter because they were the ones that were the
Okay,
closest
but let me
to
ask you this,
Jesus.
though, Kyle.
Yeah.
If there's a conflict between the scriptures and the early church fathers, who has the authority?
It would be the magisterium and the Pope. I think.
Where does it say that?
Well, I don't know that it says that anywhere, but it's okay.
So where do we come up with this? There is no pope in the first century.
Well, it would be Peter, and then Linus after that.
So
And then,
if Peter says something contrary to the scriptures, we're going with Peter.
sorry, say that again. If Peter says
Peter
what?
says something contrary to the scriptures, we're going with Peter. That's what you're saying.
Yes.
Well, then you're disagreeing with Galatians 2. That's why Paul had to check him. Had to say, I told Peter to his face that he was wrong for trying to get the New Testament believers to obey the Old Testament law.
Mm-hmm. It's not that they're infallible, though, because they're still fallible.
Well,
people.
but what you're doing is you're putting the authority in a man rather than the scriptures.
Well,
and what happens when you get later popes that contradict previous popes?
That's an issue.
Yeah, and
I
that's
agree.
what I mean. It's
Yeah.
a man-made hierarchy that was basically taken from the Roman Empire.
My final thought is, what would you think about the idea that, like, if Christ has established his church and then from the get-go they've been doing things wrong for 1,500 years, and it took Martin Luther and the reformers to come in and correct it?
Well, some organizations often need reformation. Remember, Martin Luther was a Roman Catholic priest. He wanted to reform it by getting it back to the Bible. Yeah, he was Roman Catholic. And he didn't want to break away. He wanted to reform it. And instead of admitting that Luther was correct about grace, what the Roman Catholic Church did is they dug their heels in, and said in the Council of Trent, Martin Luther said, what's all this business about praying for the dead or baptizing the dead? Well, that's in 2 Maccabees. Luther said, well, 2 Maccabees is not in the Bible. And the Roman Catholic Church basically said, well, it is now. We're putting it in there. We know Augustine believed it should have been in there. Jerome didn't. We never had an ecumenical council that put it in there officially. So now in 1545 or so, we're going to say it's in there.
I haven't looked into it enough, but my understanding of that is that Catholics would say that those books have already been in Scripture, and the Council of Trent just reaffirmed that. Because
but the Roman Catholic Church for 1,500 years did not have an ecumenical council that announced that. If they were the authorities, if the Pope was really the authority, don't you think they would have done that in the first century or the second century rather than the 15th century or 16th century?
I don't think it was really challenged by the majority of the church. Jerome for sure did not like it.
Yeah, Jerome said it.
Jerome didn't like it, but he's only one guy.
Yeah, I know, but where was the Pope? Where was the Pope to say, Jerome, you're wrong, Augustine, you're right? There's so many problems with this. I mean, it's okay to look into it and follow the truth wherever you think it leads.
Yeah.
But the scriptures are our authority.
Yeah.
According even to the scriptures itself. If not, and it's our authority because the people that wrote the scriptures down were confirmed by signs and wonders. Popes are not confirmed by signs and wonders.
Yeah, I get
All right?
that. Yeah, I think the last thing that I want to wrap up with is, like, I hear you. I'm not Catholic, at least yet.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm still considering. I'm still doing research. I guess the thing that you brought up with, like, you don't hear grace in the homily.
Mm-hmm.
I get that, and I do kind of have a problem with that because I do hear sermons in Protestant churches, and I feel like really strengthened, and I feel the Spirit working in me. Like, yes, that's it, and you don't necessarily hear that from a homily. So I guess for me and my family and my future kids, if we turn to the Catholic Church, how can we still kind of preserve that if we're not going to get it in the Catholic Mass?
Well, the question is, why would you take your family to a place where you're not getting spiritually instructed like you should?
Well, I shouldn't say that we're not spiritually instructed whatsoever. It's maybe less so. Or
Still,
in a-
why? Why would
it's
you
in
go
a-
there?
Okay, maybe not less so. It's in a different way.
Okay, but why would you think the true church is a church that is not providing what a church should provide?
Well, I think, and I've heard this argument. I don't exactly subscribe to this, but I've heard that the Protestant sermon is like the height of
It
church.
is, yeah.
Versus a mass, it's the Eucharist. The
That's
Eucharist
right.
is the height, right?
Correct.
The homily is kind of like secondary, and you do hear
Tertiary.
grace sprinkled out throughout the mass, right? And like it's in the prayers, it's in what the whole community says during mass. So it is there. It's not totally absent. And I can supplement my family and like teach them, like make sure they know that stuff, because I think there are too many Catholics that don't understand that. They do think that works is what gets them into heaven. It's wrong.
Yeah.
It's Pelagianism. It's wrong. I hate it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but I can't ignore some of the research that I've done. I find it compelling. And so I can't just say no to that.
Well, no matter what you choose, you're going to find questions you can't answer.
Yeah.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
But just follow Jesus.
Yep.
And you know about Jesus through the scriptures, not through liturgy. I mean, you've heard the liturgy over and over again. You already know that, right? You got to move on past that, right?
Yeah.
Thanks, Kyle.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. All right. Yes, ma'am. Hey, give a round of applause to Kyle, man. That was good. Yeah. Yes, ma'am. What's your name?
Noelle.
Hey, Noelle.
I was wondering, firstly, if there's a possibility you could sign my book.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Actually, Neil has better penmanship. Give it to him. He'll sign it. Yeah, I'll do it over here later. Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. And I was wondering, so I have an older sibling, and we were all raised in a Christian family, and she actually went to India as a missionary, and she was very devoted to the church. And then she turned away from the faith, and she became she's very hostile towards God now, and she's very much a liberal. And I was wondering, taking what you've explained today, how would you explain that to a family member in like trying to...
Maybe the first question you need to ask her is, if I ask you a spiritual question, will you give me an honest answer?
Me? Or
No, ask her that.
Okay.
Ask her that. Yes. Next question. If biblical Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? And if she hesitates or says no, you could give her all the evidence in the world. It's not going to matter, because it's not a problem of God's existence. The real problem is her resistance. She doesn't want it to be true. Maybe somebody hurt her who was a Christian, or maybe God didn't come through like she wanted him to, or she decided she wanted to do something that God didn't want her to do. That's why it gets very emotional rather than logical. But if she's been hurt by somebody in the church, I suggest you ask her this question. When somebody plays Beethoven poorly, who do you blame? You don't blame Beethoven, right? So when somebody plays Jesus poorly, who do you blame? You don't blame Jesus. Just because I'm not true and beautiful doesn't mean Jesus isn't true and beautiful. In fact, you should expect Christians to sometimes treat you poorly, because we're fallen. That's why we need a Savior. We're not perfect. So a newsflash for people is Christianity is not Christians. Christianity is Jesus. So keep your eyes on Jesus. But I would try and discover what her real issue is. So I would just keep asking questions. In fact, in our email today, we have this, you go to our website, we have this giveaway where it's a whole series of ways to have good conversations with your family over holiday dinners. If you go to our website, you'll see it there. If you got our email, you can sign up for it. And it's video, it's some articles, it's questions you can ask. So it's good you're trying to do that, Noelle. I would just calmly ask questions and just keep nodding and ask further questions. Because questions are easy to ask, they're hard to answer. Make sense?
Yes, thank you.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, I'll be over here later. Thank you. Yes, sir. Thank you.
My name's Devin.
Hey, Devin.
I don't really know how to ask this as a question, but it's sort of an observation just hearing the kind of the story, the rise of racism and Marxist influence and what happened to Charlie Kirk. I can't help but feel like the story of Cain and Abel is just repeating itself constantly just throughout history, where we perceive some sort of injustice has been put upon us. We obviously can't take it out on God as much as we want to, so instead we'll take it out on our brother instead. So I guess let me ask the question, does that sound right, and is there any particular reason? Is that just what the human condition is?
Neil or Kevin, you want to take the oppressor-oppressed binary thing? You want to talk about that? Yeah.
I don't want to take away from
No. Do you have your mic on? Can you guys hear? I think that's on. Just take this. Go ahead. Talk about oppressor, oppressed, all that.
Well, first of all, today's a very oppressive day for us because someone just turned a year older. When I grow up, I want to be Frank Turek. It's his birthday today. And the Beatles wrote a song about him.
Answer the question.
We gotta sing.
No.
Come
on.
Happy birthday to you. No, that's not something. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Frank. Happy birthday to you. So I don't know that I can tie it to Cain and Abel, but I do tell you that the whole concept of critical race theory is that there's an oppressor class and an oppressed class. And the moral righteousness is the oppressor class. So I don't know I can tie that Cain and Abel thing right back, but Marxism basically says, and my background is I grew up in a family of Marxists. My dad was a communist and a Marxist. My uncles were famous Marxists. One ran the World Council of Churches. So this was the conversation at dinner whenever we went home to India, was about Marxism and the oppressors and the oppressed. So that's where we get that from. So the only way I can tie the Cain and Abel to this is, yes, Cain was angry at Abel because Abel was more faith than God. But I don't know how I could tie that into the whole.
I guess the way I kind of, like, what is it, the kulaks or whatever it was, where when you find some sort of injustice is happening upon you, you want to take it out on somebody else, and perhaps...
I think that's human nature. I don't know that I would tie to Marxism, but it certainly is human nature.
Okay.
But again, okay, so you gave me an idea. Yes, if somebody's doing better than you, you want his stuff. But I see that more as greed and envy, and less of God bless them, so I'm going to kill them. Because the fundamental basis of Marxism is really atheism. There is no God, so we've got to create heaven on earth here. Right? So, I don't know that helped.
Thanks.
It's really hot.
Oh, it's really hot. Okay. Thanks for the question. One other thing about oppressor, it's really just a theory of conflict, which means you're never going to have a community, a common unity, if you pit citizens against one another based on characteristics that have nothing to do with behavior, like race, skin color, or whether you're rich or poor, or whether you're able-bodied or not able-bodied, or whether you're an immigrant or you're a citizen here. That is what critical race theory tries to do. It tries to pit citizens against one another, not on the content of their character or how they behave, but on these characteristics over which they really don't have very much control. And the conflict never ends. Whoever is an oppressor is automatically wrong and is automatically going to get hammered. And anybody who's oppressed can't be wrong. And this, by the way, is why you have the LGBTQ community advocating for Hamas. Because they're both considered oppressed groups. What do you think would happen to the LGBT community if they went to Hamas? I mean, it makes absolutely no sense logically, but that's because critical theory is illogical. They would throw those people off roofs there. In fact, there was a gay activist who offered $1 million for a gay group to go to Gaza and do a parade. Nobody took him up on it. All right, thank you. Let's keep going. Yes, sir.
Hello, Dr. Turek. My name is Jack, and I actually have two quick, unrelated questions.
Okay.
The first one would be, how would you respond to someone who says morality comes from evolution? For example, we believe murder is wrong because of our survival instinct, because we wouldn't ourselves want to be murdered.
Why don't we think rape is right then? Because then we can propagate our genes.
Are you asking me? I don't know.
I mean, there's so many different problems with all people who say that are saying that evolution gives us our sentiments, but it's not really wrong to rape. It's not really wrong to murder. It's just a sentiment that we have. Okay? But if evolution gives us our moral sentiments, it also gives us all of our beliefs, including the belief that we get morality from evolution. So it's a circular, self-defeating argument to begin with. But yeah, there are many problems with the evolutionary idea that we get morality from evolution. We don't even get life from evolution. And by the way, if we did, how would a mutating biological code have the authority to tell you what to do? It doesn't. What's the next one?
The second question was, what attributes or qualities of Charlie Kirk that you saw do you think are most important for young adults or Gen Z to model?
Wow, that's a great question. Charlie would say that one thing he loves about the virtue of courage is that you don't need to have any skill to exercise it. And Churchill said this, probably borrowing from Aristotle, that courage is the first of all virtues, because if you don't have courage, you won't do anything else. So courage is important. Also, 2 nights before Charlie died, we went on one of our night walks. I went to Phoenix 4 times this summer to help him prepare for the tour. And at night, we go on these long walks through Phoenix, always with a bodyguard, an armed bodyguard behind us. Because the folks who say they're fighting for inclusion, tolerance, and diversity will not include and not tolerate you for holding a diverse view. Anyway, the 3 subjects we talked about then most that night were Islam, the resurrection, and how can we get the younger generation to embrace marriage and family. If we can show people that the resurrection's true, that Jesus actually did rise from the dead, then Christianity's true. And if we can also show them that marriage and family is God's plan for the future, then we can fix a lot of the problems that we have and get more people into the kingdom. And if we can also realize that Islam is not compatible with the United States Constitution, with the freedom of speech or freedom of religion, and that immigration without assimilation is an invasion. If we can get people to realize all that, then the future's bright for the West. If we can't, it's not. And in fact, our birth rate is below replacement levels. So 50 years, 100 years from now, there probably won't even be a United States unless something changes. There may be the country of Idaho. You know?
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir, what's your name?
Good evening, sir. My name is John.
Hey, John.
And I like to have these debates, or not really like, but I have these debates with family members at the dinner table quite frequently.
That's your first mistake. No debates with family members at the dinner table.
Yes, yeah.
All right,
and good. I have these debates with them, and they seem to have bought into the conspiracy agenda that's kind of just emerged after.
The conspiracy of what?
Agenda. That's sort of just emerged after.
From Charlie's murder?
Yes.
Okay.
And a lot of them seem to buy into it or seem to disagree with me when I say that we shouldn't be so quick to buy into stuff like that. And I have these debates with them, and every time they bring something up, I shoot it down. And every time they bring another thing up, I'm like, okay, where's the evidence? And I debate and debate and debate. And I realized that every time I disprove one point, another point seems to just be made up. So it almost seems to me like there's an unwillingness to let go of a possibility, and it seems like there's never an end to the debate. So my question to you is, how can we defeat an enemy that is, or not an enemy, but defeat an idea that is never ending?
You may want to turn it back on them and say, if I were to go to the police and say that you were the real murderer and here are all the possible ways you could have been the murderer, would that be something I should do if I have no evidence? No, of course not. Why do we think it's okay to do that to all the people that love Charlie? Why? If it's not right to do to you, why is it right to do to them? Look, there's a difference between a possibility and evidence for a possibility. Anything's possible. It's possible that an alien shot Charlie. That's possible. But do we have any evidence for that? Al Gore was not seen in the area. Some of you will get that tomorrow. You can't just present possibilities without evidence and implicate people because you're putting them in danger. And so I would just turn it back on them. If people were to do this to you and you as the murderer when you were completely innocent and there's no evidence you're guilty, but they spun a tale that's plausible, but there's no evidence behind it, would that be right to do? All right? By the way, you might also ask, do you believe in innocent until proven guilty? Because it appears all these conspiracy theories are exactly the opposite. Guilty until proven innocent. You need to tell me why this happened and that happened and that happened. Otherwise, we're going to say you're guilty. One other thing about that, a false statement is not always a lie. I hear this all the time. TPUSA lied about this. TPUSA lied about that. A false statement is not necessarily a lie. Sometimes people are just misinformed. It was unintentional. Like, for example, somebody said that Rob McCoy, Mikey's father, said Mikey was covered in blood. Okay, Mikey wasn't covered in blood, but maybe his father got bad information somehow because a lot of us were covered in blood. Yeah. Don't assume it's a lie. You don't know. All right? Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Good evening, Frank.
Hey, what's your name?
James.
James, go ahead.
So I'm also a member of Turning Point here at Boise State.
Excellent.
I'm also a sailor, just like yourself. And I would still be in the Navy until I found out that I had a genetic condition.
Sorry to hear.
That wouldn't allow me to serve.
That's okay. You know what Navy stands for? Never again volunteer yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
You were saved.
Yeah. My question is, well, when I found out that I had a genetic condition, I'm not going to lie, I was kind of mad at God. Mm-hmm. And as yourself, as a friend of Charlie Kirk, as that murder happened, if you were, my question is, were you mad at God? And how when something bad happens to you, how do you not have your faith tested?
Okay, great question. It's okay to be mad at God. I wasn't mad at God because I know God has reasons I don't have, and I know God allows free will. And if God were to stop every evil thing that occurred, this wouldn't be a morally relevant world. And we're promised persecution. We're promised tribulation. We're even told, feel worthy of suffering for his name. And we're told, great is our reward in heaven for all this. So no, I wasn't mad. But you know what can help? Read the Psalms. Because the Psalms have almost every human emotion. You know, most of the Bible is God talking to us. Psalms are us talking to God. And you read the Psalms and people are mad at God. It's okay to be mad at God. Just don't deny God. God can take all your emotion. That's what many of the Psalms are. In fact, they're imprecatory Psalms. There are Psalms like, Lord, I pray you smash the teeth of my enemies, which was a Babylon Bee joke. Like, this family went to the printer to get their Christmas cards printed up and they picked the wrong verse. And they sent out the verse that say, God, may you smash the teeth of my enemies. Merry Christmas. Imprecatory Psalms are good. Go to the imprecatory Psalms, James. Look, it's okay to be mad at God, but realize that God doesn't owe us anything. And he came and took all of the sin that we've done on himself, and by trusting in him, we're ultimately forgiven and can be given his righteousness. And this period of time that we live, Paul calls in 2 Corinthians 4, are light and momentary troubles, because eternity is really what we're heading for, and we're going to be dead a lot longer than we're going to be alive on this earth. So just keep your eyes on eternity. Make sense?
Yep.
All right?
All right.
And by the way, the book Stealing from God talks a lot about evil and suffering, so you may want to check that out. All right? Thanks, James.
It's also Erica Kirk's birthday as well. So
It is. I
sure
talked to Erica today, and we were shocked that we had the same birthday.
Yeah. So.
We also share the same birthday with Joe Biden. 2 out of 3 ain't bad. I'm not telling you who the 2 are. You got to figure that out, okay? Thank you. Also, the country singer Josh Turner, who happens to be a friend of mine. Josh. You like Josh? I like Josh. Josh Turner. Yes.
Hello. My name is Wesley, and I would like to ask, do you think we're saved by free will or pre-reformation? Or Reformation.
I don't know if we're predestined to talk about that tonight.
Predestination.
Predestination. The answer is yes. It's both. Why? Let me explain. Since God knows all things, no matter what universe he creates, he knows how it's going to turn out, right? He can't avoid it. So when he elects to create this universe, he knows who's going to believe and who's not going to believe. But the people who are believing and not believing are freely believing and not believing. Just because God knows what we're going to do doesn't mean he's causing us to do it. Like, for example, he knew you would ask this question tonight, right? But he's not causing you to ask the question. He just knew that you would. If you decided not to ask the question, he would have known that too. So you are predestined in the sense that he knows what you're going to do, but you're still freely doing what you're doing. Now you might ask the question, well, if God saves us, why doesn't he just create a universe where everyone believes? Well, that might be logically possible, but not actually achievable with free creatures. Because here's one thing an all-powerful God can't do. He can't force free creatures to do what he wants, otherwise they wouldn't be free. So it might be that this universe, the universe we're in now, is the universe where the maximum number of people are saved and the minimum number are lost, respecting free choice. And I think a lot of times when the Bible says predestined in like, say, Ephesians, it doesn't mean you don't have a choice. It means after you're in Christ, you've already accepted Christ, you're guaranteed to be glorified. It doesn't mean you don't have a choice. You've made the choice to be in Christ, and now you're guaranteed to be glorified. Like, think about it. When I get on the plane to go back to Charlotte in a couple days, that plane is predestined to go to Charlotte. But I chose to get on the plane. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Hi. What's your name?
Hi, I'm Samantha.
Hey, Samantha.
So I am currently studying political science and entering and currently working in the area of politics.
Good.
Yes. As a Christian, how should I be confident in the work that I'm doing and the people that I work for? Since it's so actively talked about that politicians are so corrupt and you have to be this overly ambitious, egotistical person to work in politics.
Politics. Poly meaning many, ticks, blood-sucking insects.
I hope not.
But look, politics is just like any other profession, is susceptible to the 3 great temptations: sex, money, and power. In politics, a lot of times it's power. And if you think about why you sin normally to get one of those 3 things because they're good things. They're so good, you'll often take shortcuts to get them. That's the problem. So I think if you're in politics, you need to have accountability partners. And you need to ensure that you don't compromise God's morality for any of those three things. And it might be that the politician you're working for can't tolerate that. He wants you to cross lines, or she wants you to cross lines. See ya. I'll go do something else. I'll work for somebody else. So I think you have to have a very firm boundaries as to what you will do and won't do. It's a hard profession to be in, but it's a necessary profession to be in, because if godly people aren't involved in politics, then godless people will be involved in politics and set laws that affect all of us negatively. In fact, when people say I don't get involved in politics, I just preach the gospel, I say to them, I guess you don't think the gospel is very important. Why? Because politics affects our ability to preach and live the gospel. If you don't think so, go to some of the countries I've been to. I've been to Iran, I've been to Saudi Arabia, I've been to China, I was just in Egypt last month. You can't freely preach and live the gospel in those countries. Why? Because politically they've ruled it out. And we've become spoiled here because we've had the world's greatest constitution for 250 years. But that constitution can be shredded by activist judges, and it can be overtaken eventually at the ballot box if enough people don't believe in religious freedom. So we have to be involved in politics, if for no other reason, to protect innocent people and our ability to preach and live the gospel. In fact, Ali Bestucky puts it this way: politics affects policy, and policy affects people, and we are supposed to care for people. So thank you for being involved.
Thank you. And would I find the confidence that I'm doing that correct work for certain politicians just through one-on-one conversations with them, or would I just pray about that, look for that in Scripture? Like, how would I have, like, for instance, I work for an Idaho politician.
You work for what?
An Idaho politician.
Okay.
And so to be confident that he is not doing corrupt work, and I am confident that he's doing the work of the Lord, would I only know that through one-on-one conversations?
How is his voting record?
I'm sorry?
His voting record.
Conservative.
Okay, well, Neil, tell you track votes, don't you? Tell her what that's about real quickly, because it's not just what they say, it's what they do.
Of course, and that's what I get concerned about, is even though I have had these conversations, and I know generally where he stands on certain things, I sometimes still have certain uncertainties about politicians, of course.
Go ahead, Neil, just tell a little bit about what you do there.
So we actually sent a word. We work with Idaho Freedom Foundation, who actually goes through and grades all the politicians. So you can definitely go to that. And I also have a book that Frank had me on a show a while back. It's called Jesus is Involved in Politics. Why aren't you? Why isn't your church? So it goes through all the reasons. It shows that Jesus was actually involved in politics, and that's why you should be. But if you're looking for how they're voting, Idaho Freedom Foundation, run by my friend Ron Nate, and also go to our VAC, go to our VAC site, and you can find out how you get the voting guide. And we actually have 12 pastors that go through that voting guide and approve or disapprove of who is on that guide. And so you get a lot of pastor approved voting guide.
All right, good. Thank you so much. We got one more time for one more. Sorry.
Thank you.
One more. Just because we're room. Yes, sir. Oh, sorry.
Whoever it is. No, you. No, please, you. No, someone.
Oh, well, my question is for Kevin.
Okay. Oh, for Kevin. Okay, come on up for Kevin.
Right.
This is good. Come on. Kevin McGarry, ladies and gentlemen.
First of all, thanks for being here. Well, my question is for you. My name is Guillermo. I'm a student here from Boise State. I'm going for business.
All right.
I'm a Hispanic. I'm a legal immigrant.
Yes.
Just a couple of years ago, I entered here at Boise State, and I'm really proud of that, really grateful for it. Just a couple hours ago, you were talking about how woke people, well, liberal, whatever, they tend to be and can be actually racist. So me, as an Hispanic, the ethnic group that I belong to, many liberals use this, woke people, whatever, use this to call us an oppressed ethnic group.
Right.
And, well, me personally, I feel I haven't ever been harassed. Like, I haven't ever been. I don't think I've ever suffered racism here in the United States. In my country, I have felt that. I also have received many opportunities here in the United States that not even my own country received it. Well, my question is to all this is how can I engage in a healthy conversation with one of these woke people, liberal, and also how can I become successful as a new American?
Okay, that's good. Okay, so the whole oppressed dynamic, the dichotomy with the oppressor dynamic is one it's conscriptive. It's a force kind of metaphor that the left typically uses because they want sort of people to feel like they're victims, like they're set upon by the system. The system is run by the man, and the man is the ones who colonized America, so everything's jacked. Right. So this is a sort of a forced narrative, false narrative that they want, especially all ethnic groups to, because then they can be the savior. When it comes to time to vote, they say, look, I know you're oppressed, and we're the ones that's going to set you free, so don't worry about it. And of course, they're the ones that jack us up all the more. So just recognize that it's a false dichotomy. And recognize that you have all kinds of freedoms. Like Neil says, he's been all over the world, he's lived in these places, and this is the freest, most dare I say liberal place in the sense that you can do more than any place on the planet. So don't buy into the false narrative and help your friends, family, neighbors, and say, look, where else in the world can we go and start a business and express ourselves in the way that we can, like we can in America? There's too many people that have come up from nothing to multi-gazillionaires as a result of free markets and capitalism and the system that we have here in America. If you want to know oppression, you go to a socialist country and you go to a commie city like New York, and you'll see oppression. So the bottom line is that we do live in a free country. Is it perfect? No, we have all kinds of imperfections. Nobody's perfect, so therefore no system is perfect. Excuse me. Yeah. Well, Frank. Frank is. But the bottom line is, Frank is great, especially on his birthday. He's got a perfect day. But the bottom line is that don't buy into the false narrative. None of us should. We should say, no, look, that's all garbage. I see. I know what you're doing. Stop it. And the other side of the question was, what can you? Oh,
how can I become successful as a new American?
But I think that's just go for it. We have no constraints really. So since we live in a free society that allows us to start businesses and be entrepreneurs and be innovative, just go for it.
Capitalism. I love capitalism.
Capitalism, yes, absolutely. So, get married and have kids. There you go.
Get married and have kids. That's what Charlie was saying. All right, couple of quick things. First of all, with regard to socialism, here's the easiest way to refute socialism in one sentence. When was the last time you washed a rental car? You never wash a rental car. Why? Because it's not yours. You don't really care about it. That's the problem with socialism. If you don't have private property, people aren't going to care, and they're not going to work hard. Secondly, the men you see standing around here and the folks in the uniform back there and over here, do you know that they are at the ground level of civilization? That if you didn't have law enforcement, you wouldn't have a civilization? That James Madison said that if men were angels, no government would be necessary. And men aren't angels. That's why Charlie's dead. That's why we have, well, he's absent from the body, present with the Lord. He's still alive, but he's not with us. That's why all these men and women who put their lives on the line every day need our encouragement, because you couldn't do what you do. You couldn't live how you live. You couldn't have security in your own homes. You wouldn't be able to keep what you make. You wouldn't even be able to have a successful business or have a stable job unless you had law enforcement, the rule of law. So thank all these people for us. Now, tomorrow night we'll be at Restored Church, I think it is, in Eagle. I don't know if there's any room left, but I think that starts at 7. Is that right? Somewhere. It's on our calendar. If I still have a voice, hope to see you there. I'll be at the book table. Oh yeah, by the way, all the proceeds from the sale of the books will go to feed needy children. Mine. Okay, just so you know, it's right over here. All right, see you over there. Thanks for coming, everyone. Let me close in prayer. Father, thank you for Idaho. Thank you for Kevin and for Neil and for their families. We also pray for Erica, Gigi, Mac, Mikey McCoy, the entire TPUSA team. We pray for Candace, Owens, and people that are spreading things that aren't really true, that they would know the truth and do what's right. Thank you for blessing us. Thank you mostly for your son. The greatest evil thing that ever occurred was to your son, and yet it brought the greatest good. I pray if there's anyone here who's never repented and accepted what you have done, that tonight they would. In the name of Jesus we pray, amen. Thanks, folks.
Thanks for joining us tonight. If you enjoyed this live stream, please hit the subscribe button and be sure to check out these other helpful resources for more information on how to defend the truth of Christianity in this crazy upside-down world. Our website at crossexamine.org, the Cross-Examine app for Apple and Android, the I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist podcast, all your favorite places on social media, onlinechristiancourses.com, and impactapologetics.com. Thank you again, and we'll